Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had a surprising partner part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story interchaellar from 𝐕3. So let's start the video. The intoxicating smell of alcohol fills your nostrils the second you stepped out of your room. Clicking your tongue, you headed down the hall until you met with a kitchen that no longer looked like one. Empty bottles and cigarette burns decorate the countertop, not an inch of space. The sight makes you squint in disgust, seeing a figure passed out drunk hunched over the kitchen table. Not having the appetite like usual, you stepped out of the house without uttering a word to the man. "Good morning," a chirpy voice greets you with a brilliant smile, her eyes turning into crescents. Turning your head, you greet your neighbor back with a subtle bow. "Early as always, aren't you?" You couldn't help but smile. "What can I say? I'm always on the clock." She sighs, resuming her daily routine of tending her plants at 5 in the morning. "You should spend your youthful years more wisely. It's not every day that you—" Yes, I understand." You waved a hand around, not wanting to hear her entire childhood again when you had a shift to catch. "I made some bread yesterday. I'm guessing you hadn't had breakfast yet. So why don't you—" "It's all right, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. I really need to get going if that's okay with you." You did one last bow before turning on your heels, making your way down your usual route that you took every day on your way to work. The woman looked at your back with a sigh, a soft smile plastered on her wrinkly features. "Kids these days," she says to herself. The city was still mostly asleep, so you had no issues when it came to transportation. As you made your way to your first shift of the day, in the corner of your eye, you spot something white. Abruptly stopping your steps, you saw a feline that greeted you with bright blue eyes, meowing at your appearance. Checking the time on your phone, you decided you had some time to spare. "Kira," you called the cat, crouching down to pet it. The animal makes its way towards you at your calling, purring under your touch as you smiled at it. "I don't have food with me right now. I'm sorry." The cat freezes and looks up at you with sharp eyes, visibly upset that you came without an offering. You gave it the same look. "You're a spoiled brat." After a few more pets, you stood back up on your feet. "Maybe when I have some food left today, I'll give you some." You gave it an empty promise. The feline doesn't look too pleased, reminding you of last time. "If you keep giving me that look, I might change my mind," you threatened, which makes the cat hiss at you. Smiling, you sighed. "I better get going now. Go back home too. Your owner might get pissed." Once you and the cat made a mutual agreement with one another, you resumed walking, a bit faster than a while ago when you realized you had spent a little too much time interacting with the animal. Finally arriving at the train station, you swiped your card at one of the machines that granted you access to enter afterward. Just in time, your train arrives a minute after your arrival. You were lucky enough to find part-time jobs that are within walking distance from your university. You had 5, and that included an assistant librarian, a barista at one of the cafes, a cashier in one convenience store, a laundry assistant, and lastly, a pet sitter. You managed to get your shifts distributed equally. Jobs like the laundry assistant and pet sitter only happened during the weekends. Meanwhile, the rest were either done before, in between, or after classes. It was a sad thing to admit, but you were proud of your schedule. It was tedious and clustered on rare occasions, but you always managed to find a way to solve it right away. You were trying to make a living without a proper parental figure to look up to. After all, it's a small price to pay, you always told yourself. After you've made it to your stop, you head towards your first job of the day. It was the closest to the train station, you praised. Opening the glass door, the speakers nearby let out a ring, signaling the workers that another person had entered the store. The employee before your shift was scanning a person's items. their eyes landing on you as you approach them. "Mornin'," 𝗧𝗏 greets you, hands moving around like reflex as he took change out from the cash register and handed them to the customer before him, bowing to them as they made their way towards the exit. "You're a bit later than usual." He glances at the clock, his usual grin on his features as you walked into the break room and changed into your uniform. "You were 10 minutes early for your shift, but you'd usually arrive 20 minutes before. I met up with someone on the way." You responded, recalling your conversation with the cat from earlier, if you could even call it that. He leans forward on the counter, elbows in place to keep him balanced. "The boss came in today." You put all your belongings inside your locker, heading outside of the room to look at him with raised brows. "He came in to check if everything was all right. He heard there have been a lot of robberies these days," he said with folded arms on his chest. "Really?" you asked, picking a box full of things to restock. 𝗧𝗏 quickly notices. "Go rest at the back. It's still my shift." You sighed at him. "I have it handled. Just stay behind the counter, and I'll do the restocking." 𝗧𝗏 shakes his head at you with a smile. He could never understand how you could do it. He knows that you both received the same amount of pay, and yet you're working as if it's more than that. The mail has tried stopping you in the past, but later came to the conclusion that your stubbornness is not something to underestimate. He also found out how much you liked organizing things. That made him give you the nickname Neat Freak, since you refused to stay in place if you saw an item placed in the wrong section or aisle. While you had rearranged the chip section completely, there came a ringing sound from the door. "Good morning," you and 𝗧𝗏 greeted at the same time, your eyes focused elsewhere. Steps approached you slowly, but you paid no mind. The customer stops in front of the coffee section, their hands buried deep inside the pocket of their jacket as their eyes scanned shelf to shelf. Chips and coffee were on the same aisle, so the tall, slender figure stood beside your seated one. You took a glance at the man when you realized he had just been standing there, not moving an inch. Although you were sitting on a step stool, you didn't need to get up on your feet to know he was incredibly tall. You also couldn't help to notice the dark circles under his eyes. That's when you realized you had been staring at him for too long since he side-eyed you, discomfort written all over his eyes that caused you to look away. If looks could kill, it would definitely be this one. Quickly, you finished your task to leave this awkward situation you put yourself in. No longer want to face the mail until he calls for your attention in the most detached voice you've ever heard come from a person. "You're not going to help a customer in need," he cocked a brow at you. Swallowing, you turned to him with a nod. "My apologies." You approached him slowly and stood by his side. "What can I help you with?" "I'm looking for the dark version of this brand." He grabs a packet, showing it to you before you took it from him. Humming, you nodded slowly after reading the brand. "I'll check the back if there's any left, so wait here for a moment." You made your way towards the storage room, 𝗧𝗏 turning to you with raised brows. "What are you looking for?" he asks from the counter, putting his phone away. "Some coffee packets. Guy's looking for one, and it seems we've run out." You explained from inside. 𝗧𝗏's lips agape. "Oh, right. Some guy from earlier came in here and took all of our stock." You froze and walked out of the room to look at your coworker with widened eyes. "Our entire stock of black coffee," he nods casually. "I don't know what the reason was either, but I didn't bother to ask." He then proceeds to let out a laugh. Maybe he's saving up for a zombie apocalypse. You sighed, closing the door behind you. The man from earlier walks towards the counter and sets down a caffeinated beverage from the drink section. "It's no problem," he responds as he took out his wallet, handing an amount of cash to 𝗧𝗏, who accepts with both hands. While 𝗧𝗏 was counting change, the male looks at you with hooded eyes, a dark mask covering the lower half of his face that made it hard for you to distinguish. You shrugged the thought of him being a possible acquaintance, not recalling anyone you know that had dark and messy purple locks. You didn't know what his deal was, but you didn't want to ask. His eyes draw away from you once 𝗧𝗏 hands his change back, asking if he wanted a bag, but he rejects kindly. Come back again. The two of you bow as he made his way towards the exit, not returning the farewell. The second the doors close, 𝗧𝗏 lets out a relieved breath. His arms stretched upward as a glorified grin widens on the edges of his lips. Shift's done, he announces loudly since the store was now empty, giving him the freedom to do as he pleased despite the evident security camera attached at every corner of the place. How's the band going? You asked, heading behind the counter as he started cleaning up after himself. He beams at your question, surprised that you have taken an interest. It's going great. We're selling merch now, so hit me up if you're interested. You only sighed. I haven't even been to any of your gigs. He scoffs at your claim, heading inside the break room. I've offered you free tickets dozens of times, and you always declined, claiming you're busy. He quotes with his fingers in a mocking tone that makes you roll your eyes at him. Because I am busy, you retort. I get that, but you've always declined no matter what. We're also the same age, aren't we? You placed your hands down on the counter, humming. I don't know what's going on in your personal life, but it sounds to me you don't have time for yourself. He says as he starts changing back into his casual clothes. He wasn't wrong, so you don't bother to defend yourself. Would it kill you to relax for a day? He turned the lights off and closed the door behind him, taking his backpack before putting it on one of his arms. Probably. You deadpanned, but he laughs. I can't stay for too long today, but I'll be in touch if you need me. The two of you exchange goodbyes, his hand waving at you before finally leaving the place to tend his matters while your shift had just begun. You let out an exasperated breath, exhausted that you had to run instead of walk like usual since your manager came in on your shift to have a maintenance check on one of the cameras. You didn't mind it at first, but when he requested you stay longer so he could teach you how it worked or inform you what went wrong, you felt nothing but dread. If he paid you to listen to his rambling, you'd humbly accept without further questions. Luckily, you still had a few minutes until your first lecture of the day. That time spent on walking, of course. Like every morning, students were coming left and right, their eyes tired and a drink on hand to keep them awake for the day. You would have been the same if it weren't for your already busy schedule. Though it was a drag, you have to thank it for giving you time to wake yourself up to pay attention to classes. Once you've made it to the classroom, you sat down at a vacant seat in one of the rows in the middle. Though the location didn't matter since professors tend to call on random students anyway, it was your safest option. It wasn't as nerve-wracking as the front, and it wasn't too far at the back that it was difficult to distinguish the notes written on the blackboard and the white screen for the projector. As you settled down, you took out your laptop from your bag and turned the device on as more and more seats were starting to get occupied by students that had just arrived. Your professor walks in, and classes start. The lecture went the way it always did, slow and mundane. A little shake on the head made you restrict yourself from zoning out as you forced your fingers to keep typing down notes. Students were quizzed, and your name was thankfully not called out. Maybe today wasn't a bad day for you. Since your midterms are approaching, I would like to announce your final project for this semester. The low sound of students whispering and exhausted sighs fill your ears, but the professor ignores their silent complaints. Here, I have made a list of everyone's pairs. The P word makes the whispering a bit louder. Nobody liked working in groups in college. It always seemed like a drag, especially when you're with the wrong people. From your past experience, it never ended well. The professor attaches papers to the bulletin board in front, informing everyone that he'll end class early today to give the students time to discuss and meet with their partners. Each pair has to present a report regarding. You listen closely to his instructions, fingers tapping on your keyboard as your life depended on it. The last thing you wanted was to miss out on important information that you'll need. It's not like you knew anyone from your classes anyway, so you had no idea who to avoid and who was genuinely dependable. There was also another reason why you hated group projects. It's the fact that it tends to ruin your schedule, forcing you to call work and cancel a few shifts here and there to meet up with people from your class who end up wasting your time, costing you to lose money in the process that you could have earned if you hadn't canceled. Your professor says his goodbyes to everyone and leaves the classroom. A few people had already made their way towards the list on the bulletin board. The majority of the responses were sighs and frustrated looks, but a few students managed to pair with whom they knew or were acquaintances. The latter made you question whether you were the only person in this class that remained friendless. Mustering all of your remaining courage, you pulled your seat back and made your way towards the horde of people, taking your time as you waited for the crowd to lessen. You felt more and more pathetic, now realizing that you couldn't even call out a name from this class. Once you saw an empty space, you walked up towards the board and looked for where your name was. Once you found it, your eyes traveled to the name beside yours. Your face remained neutral as you repeat the name to yourself. Shinsu. Shinsu Hitoshi. You whispered with narrowed eyes, seeing if it rings a bell until a voice crept up from behind you. And your Y/F/N. A deep voice responds, making you squeak in surprise. You quickly turn to face the man whose stature overshadowed your own. You immediately recognized him, and it appears that he did as well. But his reaction was more reserved than yours. You both awkwardly stood in front of each other while your eyes remained forward. His, on the other hand, scanned you from head to toe. He had his mask down, exposing his face, unlike your first meeting at the convenience store. Now that you were looking at him closely, you noticed how similar his eye and hair colors are. His hair is only a shade darker, while his eyes are a beautiful shade of purple. He broke you away from your thoughts by clearing his throat, causing you to widen your eyes a bit before turning away out of sheer embarrassment. You made a mental note to yourself to avoid staring at him for an uncomfortable amount of time, since this was the second time he's caught you looking. Regarding the project, he starts, his eyes visibly tired, but his body language exuded self-confidence. Your lips agape. Right, you shake your head, almost forgetting the purpose of the list for a moment. I have some proposals in mind. If you don't have any plans right now, I would like for us to discuss them. Your brows knit themselves together. I don't, since the professor ended class 20 minutes early. You admit it frankly, but he doesn't react and only nods. You two walked out of the classroom in silence, eyes ahead, without uttering a word to each other on your way to the library where you both planned on working. Shinsu radiated an aura that you couldn't quite describe. It was as if his very being was sucking you in whole. You finally understood why he kept looking at you in the convenience store, although you remained perplexed. He must have recalled you from one of his classes. You were beginning to feel uncertain about yourself at this stage. Maybe I should be paying attention more, you thought. Are you listening? Eyes widening instantly, you turn to look at the male, who then lets out a frustrated breath. You've done it again. Sorry. I was trying to think of possible concepts we could implement to our report. You blurt out the first response to come up in your head, shooting him an apologetic smile. Unimpressed, he doesn't bother to respond. You don't take offense with how he's treating you, so you keep your mouth shut. It still hurt having to meet someone this rude, but what did you expect? The two of you swiped your IDs in a machine that informs the school who had recently entered the room. It wasn't as crowded as it usually was. Not that you'd know, since you don't have time in your hands to stay in the library, as most people do. Shinsu takes a seat and settles in, pulling out his laptop, while you take the empty seat on the opposite side. I was thinking of interviewing some workers at this company regarding a project that happened 5 years ago. He explained while typing things down on his keyboard, eyes not drawing away from the screen as you listened closely to him. A project, you asked? He nods. Long story short, the board of directors wasn't impressed since, as they stated, it was too costly and could ruin the company's funds. So as a result, the employee lost their job and faced a lot of consequences onward. just because their proposal was too costly. 𝗫𝗠𝐲 finally looks up from his laptop to meet your gaze. My exact thoughts. It's moronic. He pulls out a drink from his bag and takes a sip. You quickly noticed that it was the drink he bought earlier. But why would they fire them so abruptly? They could have just turned it down. He sets his drink down once he had finished it. I don't know every detail of that, but I do have their proposal. Your eyes widened, impressed and confused stirring over your features. 𝗫𝗠𝐲 notices and explains. Last year, there was an account that came out of nowhere and leaked this story along with a PDF file that contained pretty much everything we need. Your body straightens, now interested. Then it must be the person that got fired. He hums. It's a possibility and likely, but we can't be too sure. If you could send me your email, I could forward you the file. And with that, you exchanged emails with one another. Did the company get in trouble? Was the person faced with lawsuits? You threw questions at the mail, and to your surprise, he willingly answers. Since it was an anonymous source with a heavily protected account that even the police couldn't trace, they never found out who the culprit was. All this for a costly project. That person must have spent so long preparing for it. His fingers intertwine, and his chin rests on top of them as he stares at you with hooded eyes. And get this, the company ended up taking full credit for it after the CEO decided to push the project after 4 years. You leaned back, trying to process the information he was throwing at you one by one. So, this anonymous source you mentioned leaked the story after the company took all the credit, he nods. That's about it, yeah. This is a lot. 𝗫𝗠𝐲 shrugs. I guess, but what do you think? Receiving an email from him. You clicked on the file and looked through it. There was certainly a lot of information to gather. It's good, but for now, I think we should look for more. You suggest. Although I feel like we'll end up using this one anyway, we can never be too sure. You say as your eyes continue to scan through the entire thing. Very well, he clicks through his laptop. I found a few more as well, but they didn't seem that interesting as this one. Your eyes widen at him. How'd you manage to gather this much already? It would have been impossible since the project had just been assigned to everyone 10 minutes ago, unless he heard it from somewhere. Where was he getting this information? 𝗫𝗠𝐲 doesn't respond for a moment. I looked them up during class, but some of them had already been saved for future use, if that's what you want to call it. There came silence as you blinked owlishly at the mail. You didn't know what kind of food he was consuming, but you certainly wanted a piece if someone had this much skill. He sighs when he sees your puzzled expression. Is it that shocking? I'm now questioning how you perform in projects. He dissed. You shot him an offended glare. Like a normal person? With a hum, the male tilts his head slightly. We'll see. Not knowing what he meant behind those words caused you to narrow your eyes at him. Feeling motivated by the fact that you were partnered with someone as trustworthy as 𝗫𝗠𝐲, you begin looking for resources on the internet that could be of use. Not only that, but you owe him after this much he's contributed, and you want to redeem yourself, to prove to him that you are dependable. 15 minutes pass, and before rising from his seat, 𝗫𝗠𝐲 glanced at his wristwatch. I have an upcoming lecture. You should probably get going too. You shake your head at the mail as he starts putting all of his things back inside his bag. It's my free period right now, so I'll stay and look for more. He nods. Let's meet again tomorrow. I'll send you details through email. He swings his bag over one of his shoulders. Look through possible proposals so we can discuss them and decide on what to use for our report. You noted, giving him a nod before he leaves you alone. Once he was out of your sight, you felt yourself melt into your seat, a relieved breath escaping your lips. You start to wonder if you've been holding your breath the whole time you've been talking to him. 𝗫𝗠𝐲 maintained a straight face, but he didn't seem to be in the same bad mood as he had been earlier. You couldn't be sure because this was your first interaction with him, though. You took a few steps back from your mirror, fixing the collar of your shirt and looking at yourself from head to toe. A sigh releases from your lips as you check the time on your phone. I woke up later than usual. You had spent hours the night before preparing for a particular class. At nearly midnight, the professor of that class sent emails to his students with an attached file announcing a quiz. If you could hit a teacher lightly, it would be him for sure. But of course, you can't do that without the risk of being suspended or expelled. Once you've packed everything you needed for the day, you grabbed your bag and walked out of your room. Like the previous morning, your father was passed out on the same spot, but in a different position. In an attempt to walk out unnoticed, it seems that he wasn't as knocked out like usual, as he calls out your name in a sluggish voice. He coughs instantly at the attempt to talk, sitting up as he covered his mouth with a fist. You halt your steps in front of the entrance, not wanting to engage in conversation with your father. I have work. You deadpan and reach for the doorknob. His eyes were bloodshot red, a clear indicator that he'd been smoking like always. Here, he says as he reaches inside his pocket. You don't bother to turn your attention to him. Go buy yourself some breakfast with this. Anger fills your veins as you open the door, not batting an eye. You borrowed cash from one of your drinking buddies again, didn't you? He doesn't respond. And with that, you clicked your tongue in annoyance, a tinge of disgust written on your features. You couldn't believe the audacity this man had. Did he even have a bit of shame left in him? Clean the place up and take a bath. You reek, and I can smell you from here. You ordered before exiting the apartment, closing the door behind you and exhaling a breath as you did so. That's when you realized you hadn't checked your phone since last night. Fishing the device out of your pocket, you checked to see if you've missed anything apart from school emails. And there it was. You'd got a text message from a number informing you that your father had borrowed money again. Good morning, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 greets you like always. You put away your device and walked up to her, seeing that she had just returned from the grocery store. You take one of her bags and follow her to her place, which was right next door to yours. I thought you had already left, she says. You sigh. I would've, but I overslept for a bit. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 gives you a saddened look. Work today, you nodded, checking on the clock at the corner of her living room. 𝗧𝗵𝗲's hand lightly squeezes you on the shoulder. I made some pancakes. Would you like some? You've already overslept, and although eating something warm and soft in the early morning sounded appealing, you didn't want to risk missing your train. So you kindly turned down the offer. I already figured you were going to turn it down, so here. She travels towards her kitchen countertop and hands you a small paper bag. It's not filling, but it should do the trick. Opening the bag, you noticed that she had packed you a sandwich along with a small carton of milk. You know, you're still in your growth stage, so you mustn't skip your meals. You roll your eyes at her lecture, taking a bite of the food. Why do I need to worry about my growth? You asked with half of your mouth stuffed. She sighs at you, gently pushing you towards her door. How else are you going to get yourself a boyfriend? Eyes widening in surprise, you swallowed harshly that you almost choked. What are you going on about? You feel your face burn. Or girlfriend, or whatever you kids are into these days. Go on now, don't you have a train to catch? You nod at her reminder, walking out of her apartment, exchanging goodbyes with one another. You decided to text the number from earlier on your way to the station, answering that you're free at around 3 p.m., which is when your classes end today. With no response, you turn your phone off. Then you remembered that it's almost the end of the month, which means utility bills. The feeling of dread makes you slouch, sighing. Unfortunately, you didn't bump into Kira that morning. It's good, though, since that meant you had no reason to stop walking. But it was always sad starting your day without that furry friend of yours. His owner must be home, you assumed. Finishing your sandwich by the time you arrived, you threw the paper bag it was previously contained in and saved the milk for later by storing it inside your bag. As you took a step down the steps that led to the train station, you abruptly paused as your ears caught a conversation from behind. "You're always so kind. You didn't have to," a woman said to a blonde, who smiles at her lightly. "It's no problem. I was planning on heading there anyway." You hum. Weird. You brushed it off and resumed walking down, unsure why you had to stop and listen. As you guessed, today was really not your day. The quiz you studied all night for ended up being a complete fail. Though your results weren't bad, they weren't necessarily good either. You walked out of the classroom with a groan, internally berating yourself as you wondered what went wrong when you were fine an hour before. Did you overthink and overcomplicate simple questions again? Possibly. Why did you have to change your answer? You rubbed a temple frustratingly. It wasn't until you heard someone call your name as you turned to face them. Your thoughts interrupted for a brief moment. She dashes towards you, a bright smile on her face, and an arm stretched in the air as she waves at you to get your attention. "Ashido," you raised your brows. "How are you?" Then it hits you. It all made sense. Taking in a deep breath, you braced yourself. "I'm fine, good, because I sort of need your help." There it was. Ashido starts explaining to you everything, oversharing, you called it. You nodded at her, but really the only message you gathered from her explanation was, "Hey, I can't make it to my shift today." Which also meant you had to cover for 2 people alone. "I know I ask you this a lot, but could you please cover for me? I'll make it up to you one day." She clasped her hands together, begging. Now, this wasn't the first time she made an empty promise. But, of course, all you do is sigh and nod. "Fine, but..." She abruptly grabbed your hands and clutched them tightly, cutting you off as your eyes widened in surprise. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she repeats herself loudly, causing a few heads to turn in your direction, prompting you to offer apologetic smiles. With that, she was out of your sight and headed back to her group of friends, leaving you alone with your bag hanging loosely in an arm. You were perplexed as to how someone could be so energetic this early in the morning. But it's one of her perks, you guessed. You tried to remember what you were doing before Ashido came running in, as you drew the bag up to your shoulder. As you walked into your next class, you received an email from Shinsu. Taking your seat, you set your laptop up in front of you before checking to see what he had sent. "Fr. Shinsu Hitoshi, no subject, are you available at 2 p.m.? Looking around, you noticed that your professor hadn't arrived yet, so you decided to respond right away. You check your schedule and a sigh of relief escapes your mouth, seeing that your free period is at 2 p.m. today. After a minute, the two of you decided to meet at the library like the previous day, since it's the most convenient place. It's on campus, and it has pretty strong Wi-Fi that's free. As you waited for your teacher to arrive, you start thinking. You were already aware that you were pretty late when it comes to school gossip, but you try to recall if you've heard anything about Shinsu anyway. If anyone as strict and honest as him existed, there should be a few people who hated him, or worse, he despised them. You try to picture Shinsu ignoring and coping with someone who refuses to contribute to a group project, but you can't. The only thoughts that come to mind are him doing it by himself, and then complaining to the professor about the one-sided project that was supposed to be completed by a group. You've dealt with it in the past, and you always had this certain guilt that made you hesitate in speaking up. One thing's for sure, you're more than grateful to end up with someone as reliable as Shinsu. You've only met him once, but he's one of, if not the most responsible student you've ever met. It almost sent a chill down your spine thinking about it. After attending 2 more lectures, it was already 1 p.m., an hour before your meetup with Shinsu. Your professor became ill during his lunch break and sent an email to everyone regarding his health. Regrettably, for him, you soon realized how happy a few students seemed to be, with one even skipping down the corridor. A rare sight, you noted. Since you had just finished your lunch, you decided to head to the library early than planned. To your surprise, a certain someone was already there. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 sat alone at a more secluded section with a laptop in front and a drink on hand. You stood there for a moment, contemplating if you should sit with him or wait until 2. Before you could decide, he senses someone staring at him, causing him to turn his attention to you with raised brows. Since it was already too late, and walking away without saying a word would make things awkward and seemed rude, you turned your heel and approached the male. "Is this seat taken?" you asked, pulling out the vacant seat in front of him. He shook his head, gathering all of his belongings on the table to give you room. You let out a silent thanks, taking out your laptop and placing it in front of you. While you set up your device, you caught 𝗧𝗵𝗲 staring at you, but he doesn't look away. "What?" you asked with slightly knitted brows. He hums, finally drawing his attention back to his work. "Nothing. I just expected you to arrive at 3. Your mouth ajars at his assumption. "Most people I've worked with have done that, so it's only natural I set the bar low." His eyes don't dart away. Even though you knew he wasn't criticizing you, the sour tone in his voice didn't make you feel good. It was a backhanded compliment, you concluded. He brings his drink up to his mouth. Some of them don't even show up. You nodded slowly, agreeing with him in silence. You've experienced that before, and it's sad to admit that you're used to it. People always make excuses, too, thinking you're gullible when you can see through their lies. It also scares you how far they go to make it believable. You shrug. "Honestly, I thought of coming here early, so I arrive ahead of you." You admit, making the male let out a chuckle. "So you were trying to impress me?" His question makes your eyes widen a bit, feeling the tips of your ears burn, embarrassed at how meaningful it sounded when there was really no thought behind it. That was until his features went cold. "Well, I'm not." It felt like you had taken 10 steps back. "I'll only be impressed if we manage to submit this before the deadline." He looks down and resumes his work while you sat in bewilderment. You huffed. While 𝗧𝗵𝗲 had already surrounded himself with his workload, you couldn't help but zone out for a bit. After you've gathered your thoughts, you straightened and sent a few files to his email. "I gathered a few from yesterday and want you to check them out." He nods as he starts clicking around on his laptop. "Out of the 8 I found, I narrowed it down to 3 that are interesting and are worthy of a report." As you watched his eyes scan each file with a hand propped on his chin, he hummed. You sat impatiently, unsure of what his thoughts were because you couldn't decipher his neutral expression. Once finished, his eyes look up at you. "The files you chose are reliable, but I fear that 2 of them lack a certain component I'm looking for." You blinked a few times before asking him to elaborate. It's hard to explain through words, but if you look at it this way. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 gives you an in-depth explanation, comparing the piece he presented with yours. He made valid points, and you couldn't help but agree. It was almost pathetic. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 truly made you open your eyes, and you plan on using his advice in the future. As you were enthralled, he was waiting for you to lash out at him until you let out words he never received. "I understand." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was used to critiquing people's contributions truthfully since it was a shared project, and it always made them insecure and defensive, making them project their anger towards him. To his surprise, you were sympathetic and willing to listen. After a 10-minute discussion, you both had finally decided. Yours has more information on it, and I'm sure nobody's going to have the same report as ours. You told him. He nods. "We can only hope." And like that, the 2 of you began planning. You suggest questioning company staff or former employees, but he declines. He claims it's a good idea and intends to carry it out, but after further consideration, he concludes that they most likely signed a contract agreeing not to discuss it with anyone outside the company. Groaning, you leaned back. He chuckles, amused to see that you're as interested as he was. Then, a thought crosses your mind. "Why don't we interview the person?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looks at you with furrowed brows. "You know, the one that proposed this idea to the company." You specified that makes him sigh. "Even the police couldn't track the account." What makes you think that we stand a chance? You hum, the corners of your lips upturning into a smirk. What if I told you I knew a guy? He has a lot of questions, but he's too afraid to ask. Rolling your eyes at him, you lean forward. I work at this cafe, and there's this guy that's always there at early noon. He's usually by himself or meeting with these shady-looking people. Shinsu blinks at you owlishly. So, you think walking up to a complete stranger, that is most likely a criminal and wanted in 10 different counties, is going to help us? He asked. He's not a stranger, trust me. I did him a favor years ago, and he still owes me one. Unsure, he lets out a hiss. You're really going to use your one important favor on this project? You nodded without further thought. It's not like I'll need a favor anytime soon. Plus, I want to know more about this guy too. Shinsu heaved a breath, trying to take all of his information all at once. You checked the time on your phone. Actually, why don't we head there right now? He looked at you, confused. His schedule differs depending on who he's meeting, but he's pretty much there every day. You got up from your seat and started to pack up while Shinsu remained seated. You're not worried the slightest bit? He asked. You couldn't help but scoff. As long as someone didn't pay to track you down or look for your home address, you have nothing to worry about. You joked, but Shinsu remains cautious. If he's not there, we could always stay and wait until he arrives. I mean, I can sense my shift starts at 3 and will end at around 9 p.m. But you can go ahead and leave early if you still have classes. Ends at 9 p.m. You nodded with a raised brow. Yeah, on weekends it usually closes at midnight, though. Shinsu soon follows suit, organizing his belongings before stuffing them into his bag. So, you spend most of your days working at this cafe? You shook your head. Only occasionally. My schedule changes. The two of you walked out of the library alongside each other, while he continues to ask you questions. But don't you work at that convenience store, too? He recalled. With a nod and an innocent expression, you gave him the impression that you merely have time for your studies. Little does he know, those aren't your only jobs. The cafe was only across the university, so it didn't take long. You opened the door and were greeted by one of the employees. In. Your shift isn't until 3. She states, her brown, shoulder-length hair shiny as ever. You nodded. Yeah, I decided to come early to do a project. You explained, eyes scanning the place to see if the mail was there. If you're looking for 𝗳𝗵𝗲, he just left. 𝗎𝗪𝗏 assumes you're looking for the manager, and you went with it. Shinsu follows behind you, a hand resting on his bag strap. Shinsu, do you want anything? You turned your head to look at him. He draws his attention to you and sees that you were ordering. Black eye will do, he replies. All right, would you two like to split or split? Shinsu replies before you could. You and 𝗎𝗪𝗏 exchange glances at one another in surprise. You planned on paying for the both of you since you were the one that dragged him. But before you could protest, he had already handed 𝗎𝗪𝗏 his credit card. While he waits for the receipt to be printed, you saw this as a chance to look around. In defeat, you let out a breath when he was nowhere to be found. Paying for your order, you walked towards Shinsu, who had already settled down at a vacant seat. Do you have any classes after? You asked, taking the seat in front of him. He nods, his eyes not leaving his phone as he was texting someone. I have 2 more lectures, the last one ending at 6 p.m. He answers tiredly. Also, I made a concept board as a guide. He shifts the subject. Your eyes widened in shock. How much has he done already? Despite the fact that you've assisted him several times, like searching for other proposals that might have a potential of use. It sounds as if he's working on a project by himself, while you follow 5 steps behind. This would have been fine for most, but it didn't sit right with you. Not at all. You knew how it felt to be leached out of, and the last thing you wanted was doing that to someone. Actually, why don't we order 014? 𝗎𝗪𝗏 announces from the counter. making 𝗧𝗵𝗲 get back up on his 2 feet. You heaved a breath. This was going to be more difficult than you thought. After 30 minutes of silence, you and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 no longer acknowledging each other's existence as you both tend your own business, the man has yet to show up. Sorry for making you wait here with me. You probably had some places to go. You apologized. He doesn't respond for a moment. Not necessarily. I would have lounged at the library anyway, so it's a good change of scenery. You had gotten used to 𝗧𝗵𝗲 at this point. The way his words might come off as rude sometimes, but really, that's just how blunt he was. If he had an opinion regarding something, he wouldn't hesitate to be truthful. People you've been forced to work with always made you in charge of things. Whenever you asked for their opinion, they'd always agree. And when you'd ask if they want to add anything, they would respond with, "Whatever you think is best." Which never helped you whatsoever. It was sad how he was doing it on his own too. You weren't so sure if he did it on purpose or out of habit. Still, you planned to contribute the same amount of work as he did. Your thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a bell, signaling the workers that a customer had entered. Looking up, you quickly recognized who it was. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, you call for him quickly. He doesn't look up from his laptop, only raising his eyebrows. He's here. Finally getting his attention, his eyes meet yours and later turn to the hooded figure. The male was alone, and it was hard for 𝗧𝗵𝗲 to decipher his face since he was turned around with a dark hood on. You stood up and approached him, making your partner's eyes widen at your boldness. Even though you mentioned you were acquaintances with the guy, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 couldn't help but be concerned. This person could be from the black market, he thought. No, he was sure of it. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 keeps an eye on you and the male from his seat, noting your friendly interactions. It wasn't long before you started waving at him to join. Hesitantly, he eventually gets up and approaches you both. Deku, this is 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Hitoshi, my partner for the project I just told you about. He didn't feel comfortable that you had just revealed his identity to a possible criminal, but he doesn't say. The man gets up from his seat and bows at 𝗧𝗵𝗲 before shaking hands with him, a brilliant smile on his face that he didn't expect to see. Nice to meet you. He responds, freckles dusted around his features. The lavenderet didn't know how to react at first. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 expected to meet a man covered in tattoos, a missing finger, but he ended up meeting someone that looked of the same age as him. Despite the visible scars all over his hands, he wouldn't have guessed. Deku, he cocked a brow at the strange-sounding name. You nodded. It's an alias. You whispered to him, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 getting the idea right away as he doesn't ask to elaborate. Purple eyes adjust their gaze to meet yours. And he's not busy right now? Deku shook his head, pulling his hood down to reveal his dark green hair. My guest is arriving at around 5 p.m., so it'll be a while, he explained. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 nods slowly. Right, the three of you are now seated at the same table. Deku sipping from his beverage while a hacking program in his computer runs in the background. You observed his screen from the side and understood nothing. It was filled with non-binary codes, and you didn't see Deku blink once. And done. Deku's fingers finally come to a halt, causing your and 𝗧𝗵𝗲's eyes to open in surprise. It had only been 2 minutes, and he was finished. There was a profile on the screen that included a picture. I see why the police couldn't find the IP address, but it's safe to say they either paid an amateur that knows nothing about code, or the hacker they hired was in on the plan. You take his words into consideration, too busy viewing the man's image. 𝗵𝗲 was his name. He had fluffy, chin-length beige hair with tired eyes. Is there a possibility you can track his address? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asks. Deku nods. I already have it pulled up. The two of you take notes before the greenhead adds. This was something almost every hacker tried accessing a year ago when the news was fresh. Really? He nods again. Even I had a go at it. But just looking at the firewall they installed, I decided it wasn't worth it. He leaned back with a sigh. Plus, I had a lot of clients waiting and didn't have the time. You raised your eyebrows, interested. Is it that easy to hack into? He shook his head instantly, straightening his posture. Not quite, he answered simply. I have years of experience and have been hacking since. He counts his fingers, mumbling. Since I was 8. He admits enthusiastically. Shinsu's even more impressed, scared, but mostly impressed. You didn't have to be a genius to know how hard hacking is. People tend to turn a blind eye, stating things that it's just numbers and anyone could hack if they tried. But it's so much more than that. Is that all you need me to do? Deku looks up at you both, who stood behind him, still reading the information. Wait, 𝗵𝗲? Shinsu's eyes widen as he looks at the location. Deku raised his brows, looking back at the screen and nodding. That's nearly a 4-hour drive from Tokyo. The purple-haired male admits slowly, the tone of his voice lowering in disbelief. He must have gotten so tired of Tokyo that he moved, Deku suggested, taking a sip from his drink. What about a contact number? Surely he must have a phone. He shook his head, setting his beverage aside with a frown. Sorry, but this is really all he has. You hummed. Maybe this is part of the company's punishment. Both of the male's gazes moved to look at you. Hear me out. But what if he was forced to move out? Deku's eyes widened. For a costly project? Shinsu nods. She's not wrong, but he did drop several hints that this was a decision decided without further thought. The board of directors just dropped him the second he was finished. This was going to be tough. You wouldn't mind the long trip there, but all of that just to ask a man questions regarding an event that flipped his life upside down. It seemed rude, you thought. Imagining yourself in his shoes, you expected to feel neglect, but instead, you felt something spark. Maybe it's because someone was willing to take time off their day to learn and study something you prepared for so long. To learn more about your story. But Deku suddenly calls for your attention. You said this was the favor I owe you. It seems a bit unfair. Your mouth ajars before you shut it, shaking your head at him. It's really all right, Deku. He frowns. This is nothing compared to what you did for me. Shinsu stood in the middle of your conversation, trying to ignore it by thinking to himself, but fails, your exchange lingering in the back of his head. Call it a small favor from me. It's on the house. He smiles warmly at you. Deku, please, I mean it. Usually, hackers don't hand out information for free without payment. But for Deku, he seemed to spoil you a little too much. He was a regular in the cafe. Every shift you had, he was always there. You had never spoken to him outside of work. The only time you ever exchanged words with the male was when he was ordering a drink for himself. That was until you saved a certain woman from an accident almost 2 years ago. It was a dark night, and it was pouring heavily, making it hard for anyone to see. You just closed the cafe and were walking home when you noticed a woman crossing the street slowly, her head low enough that she couldn't see where she was heading. You planned to mind your own business until you had a bad feeling in you. Not long after, there came a truck that was running at full speed despite the traffic light being red. As if it was reflex, you ran towards the woman and pushed her forward before any accident could happen. Luckily, you both made it alive, but you had scraped parts of your body in the process. The woman expressed her gratitude towards you by getting down on her knees and bowing. Embarrassed, you helped her up and offered to escort her home. She asked you to come by for dinner, so she could cook you a warm meal and tend your wounds. You turned her down, but she continued to persuade you until you gave in, feeling guilty. After staying at her place for an hour, you learned that her name was Midoriya Inku. She was one of the sweetest women you've ever met. The following day, Deku came into the cafe like always. To your surprise, he mentions that the woman you saved last night was an important client of his. At that point, you were already aware that he wasn't an ordinary person, and just comparing his appearance to that of Inku's convinced you they were related. But, of course, you never informed the hacker of this secret. Even until now, since you knew how important their identities are to their dangerous occupation. Shinsu looks at his wristwatch. I have classes starting soon. You nodded, watching as he packed his belongings. My shift starts soon as well. You told yourself. Well, it was a productive afternoon. I'll send you an email again regarding our meeting time for tomorrow. Thanks. The purple-haired male waves at you and Deku, leaving the cafe finally. Once he was out of your sight, Deku hums. What is it? You asked, hugging your laptop close to your chest. He shook his head. I wanted to ask if you were having a difficult time with him. You now remembered all the times you would vent to Deku regarding projects that involved coordination with a person or a group. You shook your head. He's a nice guy. You responded, a hint of unsureness in your voice. I mean, he's the most helpful classmate I've met so far. You added, shrugging your shoulders lightly. Shinsu's just a partner for a class, and you're 100% certain that after it's all done, you'll never talk to him again. You didn't even know he existed until yesterday. The greenhead nods. All right, but if someone's giving you a hard time. Deku, enough. You raised a finger at him while he giggles, scratching the back of his head with a wide smile. It was sweet how much he cared for you, but you were also scared about how much he cared for you. Wiping the tables clean with a piece of cloth on a hand and a stain remover spray on the other, it was almost closing time. Deku had already left, and since Ishido wasn't there with you, you had to close up the cafe by yourself. As you were putting away the cleaning supplies in the storage room, you heard a bell ring from the entrance. Heaving a breath, you got up on your feet and approached the figure that waits for you, untying the apron that hangs loosely around your body. One large latte, please. You rolled your eyes at him. Fuck off, Takami-san. You growled, your words serving the honorific for respect no purpose. He only laughs. Pulling out cash from your pocket, you handed it to the blonde. You know, your father's there again. He informs you, but you don't bat an eye. He's going to end up killing himself at this point. Is that a wish? You don't respond to his question. I was only kidding. Don't be so cold towards me. He giggles, raising his hands in the air. It was sad that you were forced to spend time with this smug asshole. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was one of the regulars at this bar your father goes to almost every night, which meant they bonded over time. It didn't take long for him to start asking his bar friends for money, telling them that it's for his daughter when in reality, he would spend it on more alcohol the following night. That went on for nearly 3 months, until a police cruiser was waiting outside of your home one day, and the cop waiting happened to be the man in front of you. He had asked to speak to your father regarding the money he owed a couple of people, but you paid his debt yourself. Don't tell him about this, were your exact words to Takami. 4 years after that encounter, Takami would spend time with you whenever you two would meet like this. The male found it amusing seeing you riled up at his jokes. Your usual, I'll call the cops on you, complaint against unwanted men didn't work for him, unfortunately. Takami-san, if you don't leave me alone right now, I'm calling your boss. You threatened. He sighs, a smile still on his features. Before I leave, though, I would like to tell you big news regarding your father. You forced out a laugh. Yay, let me guess, he found a job, or maybe he won the lottery. You shook your hands around before your expression drops cold, glaring at the man. You headed into the break room to gather all of your things from your shoe locker. Takami nods. It seems that he is, actually. Mid-packing, you froze. Your eyes widen, confusion written all over your face. It would have been easily debunked as a lie, but since it was Takami you're speaking to, you were more than certain that he wasn't lying. But you weren't too happy about it. Slamming your locker shut, you brought your bag out with you as you locked the door to the break room. Does he want an award for that? With a sarcastic tone, you asked. Kid, I'm being serious here. He leaned forward on the counter. Do you think I don't believe you? You shot back. You do your last run through the cafe, checking if everything is in place. The security alarm is set, etc. While Takami's eyes follow you around. He wasn't guaranteed a position yet, but he has applied to a few. He adds. Noticing the tension that was building around you, he clasped his hands together. Since it's pretty late, why don't I drive you home? And be seen riding a cop's car? In your dreams. You turned the lights off and finally left the cafe, Takami already by his car. Do you always assume I bring the police cruiser with me? Heaving a breath, you gazed at him with tired eyes, arms folded on your chest. I'd rather be dead than be seen in the same vehicle as you. He scoffed. But you always accepted when you were in high school. Because you wouldn't leave me alone, and people were looking. You fished the keys out from your pocket and locked the entrance. He sighs. You're as sharp-tongued as ever. He comments. Out of nowhere, Takami wrapped an arm around your shoulder. You're so harsh on your uncle, you narrowed your eyes, shifting away from him in disgust. You are not my uncle, gross. You deadpan, shivering. He starts whining like a kid, causing a few passers-by to look in your direction. You glared at him as you felt your face burn in embarrassment. Fine, just shut up already, fuck. You cussed, scurrying inside his vehicle while hiding your face by looking down. Takami gives himself a pat on the back, giggling to himself proudly. You moved the cart full of books down the aisle, reorganizing them into their proper categories. Due to how messy your home tends to be, you've always had the urge to organize things and hate it when your surroundings feel suffocating and clustered. It was more of a requirement than a desire. Fiction. You repeat to yourself, turning the cart and pushing it into a different direction. Not many visited this library, so you've become accustomed to the sound of wood creaking under your feet and stamps against books. It made you feel calm in a way you couldn't quite describe, as an escape from reality almost. It was 𝗧𝗵𝗲 that brought you to this place. She was close friends with the current owner during high school and helped you obtain this job. You didn't like it at first because the amount of dust you had to deal with when cleaning made you sick. But after many painful months of cleaning this library, you're proud to say you hadn't had allergies in nearly a year. Once you had finished putting everything back on their respective shelves, you pushed the cart back to its original spot. I brought you some taiyaki on the way here. Shuzenji takes out a bag filled with the pastry, handing it to you with a smile. You take it from her with raised brows. Though you didn't feel like eating the street food this early in the morning, you ate it anyway. With your favorite filling as well. She giggles softly, pushing her glasses up. How long has it been since you last had one? You thought? She resumes her work, placing stamps on the back of every book while you watched her from the side. It was rare of her to let you eat inside, most likely forgetting, so you finished it fast. You haven't been coming here often. Has school been hard for you? You swallowed before taking a sip from your water jug. Always. You responded once you finished drinking. Shuzenji sighs at that. And you have plenty of jobs to worry about on top of that. I can manage. Like a reflex, she grabbed the cane beside her and landed a good hit on your head. You yelped, taking a step back as you rubbed the top of your skull. What was that for? You hissed in pain. She huffs. For being irresponsible, she puts the wooden cane back to where it originally was and continues her work as if nothing happened. Seriously, you've been working so much since high school. You only let out a nervous laugh. Nobody knew about your life at home, and you preferred to keep it that way. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, on the other hand, certainly knows a few things since she's been your neighbor for years and tends to be your caretaker when your father wasn't present. She always was. People at your age should enjoy life to the fullest. Go to bars, sleep with strangers, go on dates. Whoa. Explain the sleeping part. You cut her off, holding up a finger with a brow raised. She sighs. That's not the point. What's with people in their older years talking about this youth stuff? You asked yourself, recalling all the times 𝗧𝗵𝗲 would repeat her childhood to you and how spoiled this generation was, comparing how she had slept with dozens of people while you have yet to go on an official date with someone. Yeah, that was not your proudest moment. Once she was done putting stamps on each book, she gathered them and shoved them into your arms. With the number of jobs you have, it seems that you don't even have food on your table. She continues to run her mouth while you stood there, mouth ajar. It scares you how honest and shameless an elderly woman could be. You shiver at the thought of yourself becoming one in the future. You now understood why 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 were the closest of friends since high school. If you hadn't known them personally, you would have assumed they were twins or sisters. Go put those back on their shelves, she orders you. You nod with a sigh, turning on a heel. Yeah, you brushed off and made your way to one of the aisles. Her eyes watched as you walked away. Make it quick. I still have a few things for you to check. You don't respond, giving her a subtle nod. An individual entered the library, and 𝗧𝗵𝗲, who sat behind a desk near the entrance, immediately greeted them while you were scanning shelves and found that a few books were in the wrong order. You swore at the sight, putting your books down for a moment to clean up the mess. She nods, pointing in a direction. You had sat down on the ground, grabbing a few books, and read the titles on each of their spines with narrowed eyes. You don't belong here, you mumbled. Footsteps approach you, causing you to heave a breath. 𝗧𝗵𝗲-san, I'll be there in a minute, I just need to. You work here too? The familiar voice makes you draw your attention away from your task, locking eyes with a pair of pupils. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looks down at you, a brow raised. Swallowing, you quickly got up on your feet to be on the same level as him. Nodding, you took a brief glance around, noticing the disarray. Yeah, I do, you said rather shamefully, clutching one of the books close to your chest. 𝗧𝗵𝗲's face remains neutral, only nodding. Well, do you, need anything? You changed the subject to avoid the approaching silence. He turned his attention to the books you were organizing. I believe a book I'm looking for is. He points, and you quickly got it right away. It was definitely an unusual way for the universe to send you a message. You usually wouldn't have minded, but the fact that 𝗧𝗵𝗲 has seen you work in different places, the majority of it being him bumping into you on accident, has a certain degree of embarrassment to it that you couldn't quite explain. He doesn't bring it up, though. You're not sure what makes it worse. The fact that he hasn't said a thing about it, or the fact that he chose to be silent. Sorry, if you can give me a minute to arrange or put them back. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 crouches down, reaching for a couple of books. There's no need, he answers before you could finish. You wanted to slam your head against concrete right there and then. Do you mind telling me what you're looking for? You asked. He hums, putting a few to the side. Hydraspace, he says, and for some odd reason, you recalled that title. Oh, it's not here. The male looks up from the ground to face you. You motioned for him to join you, guiding him to the aisle directly next to the one you both had just been. Hydraspace. You repeat silently, a finger tracing on each book's spine as your eyes scanned through them all, looking for the letter H. You paused for a moment when you spot it. There it is, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 had reached for it as well, your fingers lightly grazing each other. As though it was instinctive, you quickly drew your hand away from his to laugh, ignoring his gaze that was lingering on you. He turns away to grab the book, flipping through its pages. If that's all you needed, then. You try to back away, but to your surprise, he continues the conversation. Do you need help? He offers that makes your eyes widen a bit. It takes a few moments for you to answer, scanning 𝗧𝗵𝗲's features to see if he felt pity, which is the last thing you want someone to feel towards you. The thought left a certain bitterness in your mouth. Distasteful as ever, you recalled. You shoot him a small smile. I'm all right. You're probably busy, so you should get going. You turn and leave. You don't decide what's my schedule. He retorts, causing you to halt. Biting your inner cheek, You fought the urge to react. You hear him turn in a different direction, his footsteps becoming increasingly distant with each step. A relieved breath escapes your lips. Once he was out of your sight, you sat back down on your spot from before, surrounding yourself with books to distract yourself. Glancing up, you realized that the entire bookshelf had been unorganized. Would it kill people to put things back where they belong? You asked yourself, hissing as you looked at it all with displeasure. Heaving a breath, you stopped complaining. It's only been 2 weeks since you've last been here, and the cleanup has doubled. Cracking your knuckles, you prepared yourself for the worst until a figure had sat themselves down beside you. Eyes widening, you turned your attention to the male, who had picked a book up from one of the piles. Shinsu had rolled up his sleeves up to his elbows, revealing his forearms. He catches you staring and looks back at you. Without question, he answers. I asked Shuzenji-san if I can help out, and she agreed. He takes a few books and places them on the shelf. Plus, I'm not staying because I feel sorry for you. I'm staying because I was planning on sending you an email anyway, asking to meet for our presentation. You felt relief wash over your thoughts. We can discuss them while we work too, he suggested, making you sigh with a smile plastered on your lips. Of course. It was fascinating how his mind worked. Though you weren't sure what his motives were, whether he was really this committed and hard-working when it came to schoolwork, or he was pitying you, you found his company warming. If you admit that out loud, the 𝗲𝗲𝗏 would definitely judge you, his stare filled with worry and concern. The image in your head makes you let out a laugh, causing Shinsu to raise his brows at you. Strange, he thinks, but he only resumes with work. I didn't see you as the type to be into astrophysics, to be honest. You brought up. Shinsu hums, handing you a few books while you place them on their designated spots. It's a way to pass the time, I guess. He shrugs, not putting much thought into it. You nod. I guess so. Then it was his turn to ask you a question. What about you? Do you read books? You inhaled with gritted teeth, hissing with an eye squinted. Not necessarily. I used to in high school, but... You paused. I've gotten over that phase. You smiled sadly, remembering the simpler days when your mind didn't know what reality was for you. One day you were running around with your friends, and the next thing you know, you were working every night until midnight. Shinsu had noticed a few things about you after only 3 meetings. Like how your eyes never showed genuine happiness, contradicting the smile on your lips, putting up a facade. But he knew he had no place to call you out. Why would he? It wasn't his business, after all. The both of you ended up cleaning 2 aisles while discussing. None of you realize how time flew by until Shuzenji came with snacks, a tray on hand filled with bread and tea. You offer her to stay, but she politely declines, stating that she has work to do, while also giving you a wink. Luckily, Shinsu wasn't paying attention to see that. He takes a sip from his tea before setting it down. So, I was thinking. You chewed with raised brows, waiting for him to continue. Shimoda. He brings up, causing you to swallow and nod. What about it? Shinsu hums, eyes attentively staring at his drink. He lets out a breath. I personally don't know if it's a good idea to interview Mira-san. He elaborates, his fingers lightly grazing his cup. You looked at him, observing his features closely in silence as you tried to get a read of him. He always had his walls up, but you were the last person to say that about someone. He clearly wanted to push through with his interview. A part of you had a feeling that he has wanted to speak to Mira ever since his eyes laid on that file. For reasons you don't know, your safest bet was he was simply interested. And you couldn't blame him. After all, you had grown quite an interest as well. If you mind me asking, why is that? Shinsu exhales deeply and rubs the back of his head, his frustration evident in his expression. It's almost a 4-hour drive there. I think that speaks enough for itself. Leaning back on your seat, you fold your arms. Yeah, but... Wouldn't it be cool if we managed to interview Mira-san? Think about the amount of information we could earn in one interview alone. We might even get the behind the scenes. We're college students that don't even have time for ourselves. I'm surprised someone like yourself has the balls to talk about free time. You don't take offense to his words. Instead, you found it funny. You couldn't help but laugh. You got me there. He tears a piece of bread before putting it back on its plate. Do tell, how many more jobs do you have? Surely this is it. The male sighs once more as a result of your nervous laughter. Scoffing, you wave a hand around. It doesn't matter. Anyway, since we're talking about free time, what do you do with yours? Study and doing projects, I'd assume. You finally take a sip from your drink, now that it cooled down. You're not wrong, but whenever I do have time to spare, I'll read or do whatever interest I have at that moment. You looked at him in surprise. Like what? Shinsu runs a hand through his hair. Why is this suddenly about me? Not hesitating to answer, you reply. Because I'm pretty sure you know more about me than I know about you. Plus, I didn't even have to tell you them myself. He looks down. Fair point. But whose fault was that? You squint your eyes at the male. As if I intended these events to happen. You lean forward and rest your elbows on the table, smiling. Go on, tell me. A purple brow raises at your request, but obliges anyway. I like going to cafes. You wait for him in silence, but he ends the discussion there. That's it. What do you mean? I told you one of my interests, didn't I? You leaned back and sighed. Yeah, but that's basic. He cocks up a brow at your claim. I'm sorry, what were you expecting me to say? The two of you bickered while 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 only sighs, hearing your argument from the front desk. Though she only allowed Shinsu to work with you for a while since he had asked nicely, and because he was rather handsome for her taste, she slowly starts regretting her decision. Luckily, there were only 5 people in that library that morning, and she had to apologize to them directly afterward. God, you're probably one of the most boring people I've met. You take the last bite of your bread while Shinsu looks at you with furrowed brows. That's rich coming from someone that doesn't do jack shit. You huffed. That's because I don't have free time. It's a talent to be able to manage a schedule like mine. You admit confidently. Shinsu sighed. I'll give you that one. Suddenly, his phone vibrates inside his pocket. He gets up from his seat and reads the caller ID. I need to take this. Shinsu walks away to a more secluded area, answering the call shortly after while you were left alone. Once he was out of your sight, you stood up and grabbed the tray to put it at the back. On your way there, 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 notices that you're by yourself and sees an opportunity. You never mentioned a Shinsu before. You halt your steps abruptly. How old is he? He's quite tall for someone in college. Is he single? Have you told him about your feelings yet? Perhaps you both just sleep with each? Nope, I'm going to stop you right there. You cut her off, your face burning. You already know I haven't dated anyone before. What makes you think I've already slept with someone? You defended that makes her hum, a hand rubbing her chin. She smiles. When I was your age, I had actually, pretend I never asked. You finally put the tray away at the back and walked out of the room. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 sighs, shaking her head disappointedly at you with her hands behind her back. You know, I could always give you tips. Men love it when you, quickly, you covered her mouth as you saw Shinsu approaching, his bag in his hand. He opens his mouth but quickly shuts it, his steps slowing at the sight of you both. Oh, hey. You greet, moving your hand away from her face as you felt her glare from below. He eyes you worryingly, but his features turn lax afterward. Something came up, so I have to go. He announces, turning to 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 and 𝗲𝗏. Thank you for letting me stay and work with you for a while. I also appreciate the snacks you prepared. She giggles at him. Please, this is a public area. Come by another time. I would like to see you again. You knit your brows closely to each other, glancing at her from the side for a short second until he calls for your attention. I enjoyed today, till next time. He waves before burying his hands inside his pockets, heading towards the exit while your mind was still processing his farewell. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 nudges you back to reality, a smug look on her face that makes you roll your eyes. For the rest of the morning until lunchtime, she kept bugging you around the library, refusing to leave your side as she rambled about her love life and how Shinsu was her type. Why don't you just ask him out then? Was your go-to reply whenever she started. While the woman enjoyed every second of it, you had grown tired. At that point, you could recall their memories like it's at the back of your hand. After she hands you your payment for the day, you walked out of the library, stating your goodbyes and expressing your gratitude as you do. You didn't feel like going back home to eat lunch, so you decided to have a look around the area. Usually, you wouldn't waste money on food on a weekend because it's valuable in your case. But today, you wanted to relax a little. It wouldn't hurt to spend a little more than usual, right? It was much more complicated than you expected. You've seen a few restaurants here and there, but their items were either too expensive or didn't fit your tastes. Your search for lunch became tiring, your legs growing tired, and at that point, anything would have tasted amazing. As your eyes scanned every store, they lock eyes with a familiar pair. Instantly, 𝐒𝐻𝐈 gets up from her seat and rushes towards you, greeting you with a wide grin like always. In good timing. You felt your stomach drop. It was happening again. Flashing her a smile as well, you dip your head a bit. Hey, 𝐒𝐻𝐈. You try to show a bit of enthusiasm to be polite, not wanting to be rude to her despite everything. She was a sweet and charismatic girl, maybe a bit too energetic for you. But it wasn't like 𝐒𝐻𝐈 caused any harm. There were certain times when she tends to be a pushover. But overall, you've had nothing but pleasant experiences with her. Whenever you both were working together at the cafe, time flew by exceptionally fast. I was actually planning on texting you after I finished lunch. She points at her friends, who all turned in your direction. You smiled lightly at them as well, averting your attention back to 𝐒𝐻𝐈 right after the small exchange of greeting. 𝐒𝐻𝐈 lets out a giggle. Remember when I told you that I owe you one? You nodded slowly with a brow raised slightly in response to her recollection. A smirk crept on her lips as she turned to fish something out of her purse. Well, she takes 2 pieces of paper out, waving them inches away from your face. You only stared at her, confused. Well, the band I manage for has extra tickets, and I thought, why not invite you? You try to examine her for a moment. It was certainly the first time she's offered something as a favor. I'm giving you 2 so you can invite a friend with you. The gig is on Monday night, be there. She points at you, her brows furrowed and a pout on her lips. Hesitantly, you take the tickets from her, looking down at them with widened eyes. 𝐒𝐻𝐈 laughs, landing a slap on your back that causes you to jolt forward. I'll see you then. The details are on that ticket, but if you have any questions, you have my number. She sends you a cheeky wink before running back to her friends inside the restaurant, leaving you alone outside with 0 thoughts crossing your mind. But there was really only one thing you could think about at that moment. Who the fuck has a gig on a Monday night? Heaving a breath, you put the tickets inside the small pocket of your bag. Before you could take a step, a car stops beside you. When you check to see who it was, your neutral face becomes disgusted, locking eyes with a pair you didn't want to see. Takami pushed his shades down, revealing his golden eyes to you. Didn't expect to see you here, he says. You sighed, ignoring him as you resumed your steps. He playfully rolled his eyes at you, setting his car on drive as he matched your pace on the sidewalk. Do you need a ride back home? He asked. Do you have updates on my dad? Or have you been following me this whole time? You avoid his question, not looking back at him. The blonde runs a hand through his hair, heaving a breath. Do you really think all I do is follow you? You shrug, tilting your head a bit. I just left the police station to eat lunch, he answers. Say, why don't I treat you to lunch? There's this place. He didn't come back last night. You cut him off, causing Takami to stop his car to stare at you. And what? You think I killed him, he says. But you don't respond right away. He turned away. I mean, it's possible, isn't it? You did ask me if I wished he was dead last night. That was a joke, he retorts, a nervous smile on his face. You looked around to see if anyone was watching. When the coast was clear, you take a step closer to the vehicle, peeking your head in the opened window. Then I'm guessing you know where he is. I take it that's why you're looking for me. Takami laughs. Is it that obvious? Not a minute passes, and you open the door to the police cruiser, fastening your seatbelt. I'm also guessing this place you're taking me to is where my father is. He taps his pointer fingers against the steering wheel. Ding, 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 Takami sings. Sighing, you turn the other way. Just make it quick. I already lost my appetite. He frowns at you. I was planning on treating you. Come on. He nudges your side as he starts driving. Maybe you should have thought about that sooner before going around, looking for me only to force me to bring my unsupervised father back home. You folded your arms on his chest. Takami shrugs. I'm sorry, kid, but there's only so much I can do. You no longer respond, only wanting this to be over already. You looked outside of the bar before exiting the vehicle. You'd be lying to yourself if you said this wasn't the first time you've done this. Takami waits in the car while you head inside to retrieve your father. This restaurant was also a bar, meaning there were a handful of people eating lunch here. You braced yourself for the worst as you entered the familiar yet mysterious setting. You've only been here to take your father home, so you never really sat down or stayed for more than 5 minutes. If people from your university were here and saw you, you definitely wouldn't notice. It's a blessing in disguise almost. In Kurogiri, the bartender that owns the place greets. You nod, approaching him with an apologetic smile. He's in the washroom. He's been here for a while now, so he'll be out soon. And like that, you sat yourself down at one of the stools. Milkshake, he offers, but you kindly decline. Not long after, Takami enters the bar and greets the suited man. Kurogiri sighs at the male. So you're the one that brought her here, he says in a disappointed voice, wiping a glass clean while the blonde only laughs. What else did you think I was going to do? I'm still on duty. Certainly something more responsible than this. Have you eaten lunch yet? Kurogiri turns to ask you, but only Takami responds. Nope. This is another reason why I brought her here. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He earns another sigh. That saying comes out shady whenever it's from you. Their bickering continues while you were taking short glances at the clock. Having enough, you pushed yourself back and stood up from your seat. It's been a while. I'll go see if he's still breathing in there. You walked away and headed towards the sign that led people to the restroom. It didn't take long for you to hear someone retching their guts out. Motherfucker, you cussed and hurried your steps. Knocking on the closed stall, you call for his name. It's time to leave. After 2 minutes, still no reply. Letting out a soft apology to Kurogiri, you jammed your side against the restroom to have the door opened. Embarrassment filled you when you realized who it was. Taking a few steps back, you dipped your head low and apologized instantly. I'm so sorry, Aizawa-sensei. He takes in a deep breath, visibly ill. I thought you were someone I knew, and you start to ramble until he raises a hand at you. Forgiven. You only looked at him, concern written all over your features. Don't worry about me. Go and deal with your own business, since it seems you're going through an issue yourself. You didn't know how to leave at first since you had placed yourself in such an awkward situation. Giving him a wave, you walked out of there as if your life depended on it. Once Takami spots you, he notices the disturbance all over your features. Did something happen? He asked, seeing that you didn't come back with your father. You nodded. Yeah, he's not in the restroom right now. The 2 adults looked at each other with wide eyes. What do you mean? You paced around, trying to calm yourself down. Well, he obviously ran off somewhere. Without another word, you took your wallet out. How much does he owe this time? You turned to 𝐒𝐫𝗫𝗍, who was still gathering his thoughts. Again, this wasn't the first time your father has run off to avoid paying. It's also embarrassing to admit that he's blacklisted at a few bars. Don't worry about that right now. Tell me so I can pay. You cut him off. He nods in defeat. Very well, but you shouldn't be the one paying for this. It's on the house today. You shook your head. If you keep babying him like this, he's never going to grow up. Do you want my whole wallet? Because I'll give it to you. Takami snatches your wallet from you. First, we need you to calm down. Luckily, no customer was seated by the bar area, so no one had spotted your small breakdown. I'll look for him. We don't want him seeing the two of us together anyway, unless you want to break the news to him that you've been the one paying for his debts for the past 4 years. Takami raises a brow while you stop to think. 𝗓𝗓𝗓 remained at the side. After taking deep and long breaths, you nodded. Fine. Go look for him. You said in defeat. Takami places a hand on your shoulder, a smile on his lips. Why don't I buy you some takeout instead? Do you have places to be after lunch? The two of you walk out of the restaurant while arguing. 𝗓𝗓𝗓 wishing you well and hopes to see you again. Aizawa walks back to his table, sitting down, followed by a deep sigh. Shinsu sets his drink down. Are you sure you're okay? He asked him with knitted brows. He nods. Maybe I drank a bit too much. He admits to the younger male who was visibly worried considering the fact that his professor was a heavyweight. I also had a bit of an encounter in the bathroom. Shinsu heaves a breath. I really don't want to know. There was this girl, Y/F/N I believe. She forced the door open, thinking that I was her father. He reaches for another glass of beer, but Shinsu stops him with a raised brow. Aizawa nods slowly. A classmate of yours? The lavenderet hums, nodding. She's the one I got paired up with. No big deal. His professor starts looking around. Is she still here by any chance? Shinsu shrugged. I haven't seen her. Aizawa's eyes travel from behind his student, a wall made out of glass. She's leaving right now with. The two of them look in your direction and watch as a blonde police officer opens a door for you. Their eyes widened in unison. A cop. Shinsu finishes. For a while, it was quiet before Aizawa brought up the subject of education, feeling as though he'd seen too much and doesn't want to question a student's personal business, especially if it looked that suspicious. While he explained to Shinsu every detail he lacked in his research paper, Shinsu had zoned out. Though he didn't intend to and knows how awful it must sound out of context, he finds your life quite strange, but not in a derogatory way. The male didn't know you personally, but he knows a few things about yourself. That included the concerning amount of jobs you have. And now seeing you enter a police cruiser with a man that looked a bit too different from you to be a relative piqued his interest. You could be adopted, he thought. But then again, you didn't seem to be the type of person to enter. Shinsu, Aizawa calls for his attention, noticing him spacing out in the middle of his lecture. The younger male's eyes widen, looking up at him with raised brows. He heaves a breath. Are you okay? I don't have all day. Aizawa grumbles, smacking a stack of papers on top of his student's head, who apologizes silently. Realizing that he had no place to assume what life you had, Shinsu quickly shook his head to stay focused. It wouldn't be right. After all, the closest the two of you had gotten buddy-buddy with each other was when you were working together in the library. Although it was mainly about discussions for the upcoming project due in 2 weeks, that was the first time he's had faith or felt comfortable around someone. That thought causes him to frown a bit. Bottles decorated the kitchen countertop, and it wasn't reducing with each passing day. It was Sunday, which meant you didn't have classes and had a whole day to yourself. You tend to spend your mornings cleaning up the house, but that isn't always the case. There were certain occasions when one of your bosses would call, informing you that a person canceled, and they're in need of staff, which was most of the time. You didn't mind, though. That means you'll make more money that day, which isn't entirely a terrible thing. You look back at one of your conversations with Takami 3 years ago, when you joked about becoming a prostitute if it meant paying the bills. You'd be horrible at it. You recalled him saying, once you finished stuffing all of the empty bottles in a garbage bag, you walked out of your apartment to head over to the neighborhood's recycling bin. Good morning, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 chimes as always, having a watering can on a hand as she tilts it forward to one of her potted plants. Are you going over to Wash's later? You turned your head to shake it. I was. But they're currently undergoing a maintenance check on the washing machines today. They mentioned it might take the whole day, and so they decided to let me off this week. You explained, to which she nods. She heaves a breath. Bad timing. I was planning on asking you to send a bag over. You draw your attention to the bag resting beside her entrance, waiting to be dragged and cleaned. I could still stop by there, but I don't think your clothes are getting washed until tomorrow. You concluded before walking towards the different kinds of recycling bins across. Crouching down to their level, you start putting in the bottles individually, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 continuing the conversation despite the distance between you both. So you're free the whole day? She asked. It takes you a while to respond, trying to remember your schedule for today. But before you could muster a reply, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 smiles. If that's the case, why don't we, now that you mentioned it, I might have a shift at the cafe today. You shrugged at the thought and resumed your task. She heaved a long breath, disappointment evident in her features. You're always so busy and don't have a break. At this stage, I might outlive you. You couldn't help but laugh at her claim. You know what? Maybe that won't be such a bad thing. Getting back on your feet, you turned around and met a woman who had her hands on her hips, shooting you a glare. Leaning your head back, you scoff. I'm fine. Geez, you and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 worry too much about me. Your careless remark causes 𝗧𝗵𝗲 to land a gentle hit on your head. It's because you don't worry enough about yourself. Feeling too tired to argue with her, you decided to keep your mouth shut. It's not like you had time to worry about your well-being anyway. Before your parents split up and your late mother's passing, you were surrounded by people that loved and cherished you. At least that's what it seemed to your eyes as a child. The thought of your naive childhood makes you miss it a bit. A paradise you could never go back to, a sad reality you had to face. Oh, that reminds me. She asks you to wait for a moment as she hurries inside her apartment. You watched as she ran out after a minute, a list in her hand. I almost forgot. My granddaughter will be staying here in 2 days, and I haven't tidied up the place yet. Do you mind fetching me some ingredients for later? You take the piece of paper from her with a shocked look. Your granddaughter? She's visiting. She nods at you excitedly. Yep, hopefully. I'm not adding up too many things for you to do today. I don't mind. Since your shift wasn't until 3 p.m., it didn't seem like a bad idea. Plus, it's the least you could do for her. 𝗧𝗵𝗲's always talked about her granddaughter to you, so much that it almost felt like you knew her personally. In her words, she was charismatic, creative, ambitious, and was a huge nerd when it came to inventions. She's made a few herself, you noted previously. There's this sale in the grocery store tonight. It starts at 10 p.m., though, so are you really sure that you can? You shook your head at her. It's fine, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. I really don't mind. Little did she know, your shift ends at 8 p.m. due to an emergency. But she didn't need to know that. You've stayed up multiple times in the past just so you could catch grocery sales, and it always worked out on your end. Since your first time, you've learned a lot, including not to offer mercy, especially to senior citizens who attempt to make you feel sorry for them. They're one of the most manipulative people out there. Ruthless and scary. Maybe you'll bump into a few of them later. The thought makes you rush with adrenaline that you can't wait to go back to the battlefield. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 hits you back into reality. No fighting anyone, all right? I don't want to wake up in the middle of the night to a phone call from a manager saying that you snatched a slice of beef from a poor woman. You gasped at her accusation. I'll have you know, that woman you're talking about lied about everything. I clearly had it first. And then she hushes you. Just don't cause any trouble. If you get caught again, book it to the nearest cashier and leave as fast as you can, she suggested, making you smile as she squeezes your arm, walking away. As you stayed a bit longer outside to take in your surroundings, you recalled the number of chores that needed to be done. The reminder makes you sigh. It wasn't your favorite thing to do, but the end result always felt satisfying, like finishing a jigsaw puzzle after spending 3 days on it. Tilting your head from left to right, you stretched your arms forward. Luckily, your father was passed out in his room today, which meant you had the entire living room and kitchen area to clean up. Fun, you thought. As you were about to walk into your home, you stopped when you remember something. Turning, you looked at the bag of laundry outside 𝗧𝗵𝗲's door, waiting for you to claim it and take it to washes. It wasn't far, only a 3-minute walk, but your to-do list was getting longer and longer by each second. Taking in a deep breath, you decided to grab the bag and placed it on your porch. You might as well just collect your laundry since your washing machine broke recently, and you didn't want to spend a concerning amount of money to get that fixed yet, especially when the bills are approaching. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Now that the countertops were free from bottles, it was time to scrub every nook and cranny of the main room. What made things worse was the fact that the furniture reeked of cigarettes. While setting aside the cushions of the couch, you stopped to think. There must be something else on your schedule today apart from your shift at the cafe, chores, and the favor 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked you to do. School comes to mind, making you check your emails to see if anyone had sent something. You scrolled through your inbox and found nothing. Rest day, you would have assumed, but you quickly discarded that possibility. You're giving it an hour until someone sends you an email. Until then, you'll have to get your chores done. Great. And so, your morning began. It only took 2 hours and a half to finish. Your laundry, along with couch cushions and 𝗧𝗵𝗲's bag of clothes, were right out of your porch as you cleaned up every cabinet as well. You tossed a few expired products into a new bag, feeling ashamed that you hadn't done anything sooner. You haven't spent much time at home lately due to your midterms were approaching. The thought of going on a whole week with less than 3 hours of sleep made you sick already. It didn't end well last time. It never did. Although there was a clear improvement compared to last year, it still felt like you were falling far behind. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, on the other hand, was more than proud of your results, even offering to take you out to celebrate. Instead of accepting your rejection, she called 𝗬𝗏𝗔𝗄, owner of the cafe you work at, and said you had plans. Of course, you were upset, but it didn't take long for your emotions to settle when you saw how ecstatic she was about spending quality time with you. She prepared you food, took you on a stroll around town, etc. And it felt like you had gotten closer to her after that night. After you've brought everything back into its original spot and threw away the trash, you walked out of your apartment and looked down at the things you had to take with you. You had 3 couch cushions and 2 bags full of dirty clothes. Pursing your lips together as you squint your eyes at them, you try to think of a plan. There was only one of you and a pair of hands. Taking in a deep breath, you tucked 2 cushions between your side and an arm while the last cushion rests on the other. Bending your knees to grab the bags without having them fall off was a success. You were well aware that you looked ridiculous, but the prospect of walking back and forth filled you with dread. It'll only be for 3 minutes, you told yourself. The cold breeze brushes against your skin, making your teeth chatter at the sudden contact. Snow was approaching, you predicted. As much as you want to love winter, it simply wasn't the same. Having to wear layers of clothes wasn't the main issue. It was traveling at night. That meant the sun would be setting at around 4 p.m., and walking around at night was already dangerous enough as is. You weren't too bothered about it. But the last thing you wanted was getting lectured by 𝗧𝗵𝗲 under the snow. It's dangerous. Women at your age shouldn't be walking around alone at night. You're careless. You could have been kidnapped or stabbed. The list goes on. And what shocks you the most is that she never runs out of things to say. An unfortunate talent, you thought. The sight of purple causes your train of thought to stop, your feet doing so as well, watching as the familiar figure looks behind trash cans, whispering words to himself with squinted eyes. You swallowed the lump forming in your throat, questions piling themselves inside your head. Before he could notice you, you decided to turn the other way and make your escape. Silently, you got on your toes and attempted to walk away. Shinsu, who had practically seen you the second you tried, heaves a breath. I can see you. He says that makes you freeze. He stands up straight, having a hand inside his hoodie's pockets. Didn't so what are you doing here? You quickly changed the subject, flashing the male an awkward smile. He quirks a brow. I live in this neighborhood. You. His response makes your eyes widen in surprise. This could not be real. Ever since you were assigned as partners, you've been seeing his face every single day. Planned meetings aside, it was more than weird bumping into him at the library. A possible stalker, you debated. You quickly shook that thought away. It wasn't like you've seen Shinsu do anything remotely sketchy. While you were trying to think of a reply, his purple eyes traveled down, noticing 2 large bags on both of your hands and multiple cushions tucked in between your arms. You're working. You almost take offense to it until you remembered the place you're going to technically is work. Just not today. Actually, I'm heading to the laundromat. What about you? I'm sure you living in this neighborhood has no reason for you to be looking behind trash cans. He sighs at your remark. I'm looking for someone. He hesitates to say, breaking eye contact with you. Someone? You raised a brow at him. Behind a trash can. Shinsu leaned his head back, exhaling through his nose. Yes, and it's none of your business. Giving him an offended look, you nodded with furrowed brows. All right, then. You would have raised your hands in the air to surrender, but unfortunately, they were full. Well, have a good one. You say as you flashed him a forced smile, attempting to walk past him until he calls you to wait. Slowly, you turned your head to look at him. He takes in a deep breath. Sorry for that, lashing out on you. It was highly immature of me. He dips his head a bit, apologizing. I'm actually looking for my cat. You looked at him in shock, gasping as you drop one of the cushions on accident. Shinsu heaves a breath. I regret opening my mouth already. He says under his breath as you tried to pick it up quickly. You have a cat? Is it really that shocking to you? You nodded without hesitation. Could you blame me? Don't get me all wrong, but you're kinda. You paused, causing him to lift a brow. Actually, never mind. You do seem like a cat person if I'm gonna be honest. Shinsu turns to the other direction. Forget I ever said anything. Quickly, you pulled on his sleeve before he could take another step. Wait, hold on. I'll help you look around. He furrowed his brows at you. Uncertainty dusted over his features. Do you mind pointing to me where your house is? I know a few areas where cats tend to hang out with each other, so your cat might be somewhere there. He hums to think. It's right around the corner, not too far from here. You don't ask him to elaborate, receiving the hint that he wasn't comfortable giving his address to just anyone. All right, follow me. You say, leading him in a direction, but Shinsu remains standing. Noticing, you turn around to look at him, confused. Shouldn't we put those away somewhere? You blinked at him, confused. Slowly following his eyes, you noticed that he was referring to the things you were holding. Good point. Shinsu approaches you and takes 2 cushions from you. Oh no, you don't have to. The smell it's fine, he assures you. So, where's this job of yours this time? He starts. You cocked a brow. Is that really how you see me? He hums, tilting his head a bit with his lips forming a straight line. Shinsu's reaction makes you groan. Although he wasn't wrong completely, it still felt like a stab through your core. Our washing machine broke last week, and I don't plan on getting it fixed yet. Not only that, but I'm also doing my neighbor a favor. He chuckles. Sure, he says with a cunning smile that made you want to glare at him. So, this thing about cat hiding spots. How do you know about them? He asked, genuinely curious. Well, just like you, I live in this neighborhood. You answered, pride in your tone. Since I come home late and work at, well, multiple places, I tend to switch routes from time to time and end up spotting a few cats here and there. Shinsu nods at your explanation. That must mean you see cats a lot then. Maybe even mine, since he tends to leave home and wander around until it's feeding time. Humming, you faced him with raised brows. The chances are pretty big. Mind giving me a description of what he looks like? Before he could answer, the two of you had arrived at the laundromat. Just when you were about to call out your boss's name, Shinsu asks you a question. Wait, don't tell me you're planning on stuffing these cushions into a washing machine. You took his remark as an insult. Your eyes narrowed. Of course not. Who do you think am I? Wash keeps a vacuum cleaner here, and I plan on cleaning it that way. Plus, ours broke weeks ago. And, you paused and blinked, feeling embarrassed that you've told him how your washing machine broke, and now your vacuum as well. To your surprise, Shinsu doesn't bat an eye, only humming. Must mean you're close to the guy. He wasn't wrong. But you also hinted to him minutes ago that you didn't work here. Steps approached you both. Wash looks at you with wide eyes, surprised to see you, and he calls out your name. I could have sworn I sent you a text. You interrupt him with a loud laugh. Just came by to drop things off. By the way, your vacuum cleaner, do you mind if I use it? He nods at you hesitantly, giving you an odd look as you grab Shinsu by his arm, dragging him away before Wash could say another word. What are you? They're currently undergoing maintenance. I plan to make it quick to avoid us causing any trouble. You whispered to him. You had zero ideas as to why you were acting that way. Maybe it was because you've embarrassed yourself in front of him so many times that you needed to change his view about you. Whatever it was. It didn't necessarily feel good having to reveal your financial situation to someone you couldn't even consider a friend. An acquaintance, partner, classmate. It rubbed you the wrong way. It was almost depressing. He nods slowly, taking a look around while you hurried towards the supply closet. Once you had retrieved the vacuum, Shinsu had sat down on one of the seats, eyes focused on his phone. It was a little uncomfortable making him wait on you, but you were grateful for the sound of washing machines filling the room with noise. If it weren't for that, you'd be suffering from a lot of silence. Plus, what is there to talk about with Shinsu? You could bring up the project, but you didn't necessarily feel like talking about school on the weekend, especially on a Sunday. It's already painful enough. You met him yesterday during your shift at the library. And now this. Then, a thought hits you. Turning off the vacuum cleaner, you called for his attention. You haven't told me what your cat looks like yet. You reminded. Shinsu peels his eyes off from his device, looking up at you. Right. Well, for starters, he has white fur. You nodded, putting your work aside for a moment to listen closely to his description. Bright blue eyes. Definitely a lot of strays with the same description, but there are a few in this neighborhood. Anything else? Shinsu hums, looking down at his shoes to think more. Maybe your cat's just walking around somewhere. He'll return eventually. Before you could turn the vacuum on once again, he adds, I do let him wander around, but he usually goes home by dinner. It's nearly been 2 days, and I haven't seen him at all. Shinsu admits with knitted brows. Cats go on rebellious phases. I'm sure he's fine. I'll still help you look around, though, if it makes you feel better. He sighs. Maybe it's because I started this stupid diet. You raised your eyebrows at the mention. Was he gaining weight? No wonder he felt the need to. Shinsu shoots you a glare from across the room, causing you to stop talking. I've had this feeling for a while now that someone has been feeding him. After some time, he's gotten rather picky with his meals, even sneaking out in the middle of the night to look for more. I haven't been neglecting him with food either. He's just been gaining so much weight that it's getting concerning as his owner. He leans back, sighing. This is stupid. It was rare to see Shinsu show this much emotion all at once. Seeing him care so much about an animal made you think. Someone walked in the entrance, and sure enough, it was the repairman. He had a toolbox in a hand as he entered by himself. He spots you from behind the counter and greets you with a smile. Didn't expect to see you here today. Swallowing, you turned your gaze from him to Shinsu, who already had a brow raised. Why would you expect me to be here? You scoffed, fanning your hand towards him. Before he could add, you turned the vacuum on and resumed cleaning one of the cushions. Unfortunately, it wasn't as loud as it usually was as you pressed its end against the fabric. Wash informed me that there wouldn't be any workers. Yes, he did inform me about there being a maintenance check today. I should have messaged him to tell him that I'll be dropping by. My apologies. You dipped your head at the man, who was getting more and more confused by the second. It didn't take long until Wash joined the conversation. He notices that you were behind the desk, causing him to reassure you that he'll have your cushions handled. He hurries towards you and gently pushes you away from your duties. It's your rest day, you shouldn't be here, he says, motioning you towards the entrance while also explaining that he'll have the bags you've brought with you washed. Shinsu meets Wash's gaze and nods, following you from behind as he watches you struggle to break free from the man's push. I'll have them ready by tomorrow morning, so stop by before you start your day, all right? He tells you, finally having you out of the place. But use this time to take a break. Tell your friend, His eyes glance at you for a second before introducing himself afterward, bowing to the man who does the same with a friendly smile. He nods. Shinsu, please do tell her to take things easy for today. You watched as they both have a conversation among themselves until you butt in. We're not really, Wash only sighs. I have a lot of things that need to be done by the end of the day, so I don't have time for chit-chat. Run along now, you two. He swats his hands at you too until you both finally walked away. You can feel Shinsu's gaze from the side, making you heave a breath. What? He turns away once your eyes met. Nothing, as always. You couldn't quite get a read of his expression. You've gotten used to the tone of his voice and how it tends to sound a bit rude from time to time. But he really only means well. At least that's how it went most of the time. Well, Shinsu starts. With a raised brow, you gave him an odd look. My cat, he states. Your lips separate from each other at the reminder. Right. The reason why you're both together in the first place. So, white fur and bright blue eyes. You looked up to think more. Perhaps you've stumbled upon his cat at least once before. And as you've stated previously, you think someone in this neighborhood has been spoiling your cat, he nods. Correct. The more you thought about it, the more you felt your mind start to itch. Was this a message of some sort? You thought. Of course, that was until Shinsu adds a final detail that you could no longer miss. His name is Kira. I've had him for almost 4 years now, and never in my life have I ever seen him act this way until a year ago. That name. Surely not slowly. The pieces in your head start solving the puzzle by themselves. A white-furred, blue-eyed, and a spoiled cat named Kira. This could not be a coincidence. No matter how many times you deny it, at the end of the day, you're the neighbor Shinsu has been talking about since earlier. And he has yet to know that information. Laughing nervously, you turned away to avoid his eyes. Maybe he's just, meeting a few ladies. Cats got their business too, you know. Shinsu doesn't seem too impressed by your answer. To be honest, I'm pretty sure Kira's gay. Quickly, you looked back at him with shocked eyes. He nods at your questioning look. Then, maybe he's met up with a guy? I'd say that's possible, but… He sighs. I'm more than sure this is about his new diet. He probably tolerated that for a few days until he saw that I ordered this exercising wheel for cats. Things were getting more and more complicated. You would have never expected someone to have such a dramatic yet passionate relationship with their cat. All of this just because you thought it was a good idea to feed cats you see on the street. So much for being generous. I almost met the person, to be honest. Your brows raised instantly. The person that's been feeding Kira. He elaborates. It was really late, and I was getting worried for him since it was already past his dinner time. Though I only saw Kira, I was pretty sure there was a person before my arrival. While Shinsu continued to explain his story, there was no denying the trouble you would face if he found out. What do you plan on doing to this person if you meet them? He hums, taking a moment to think of his answer. I don't know. It depends. We'll only find out if we happen to bump into the person. Surely the last thing on Shinsu's mind would be murder, right? Of course. There would be no way, right? Shinsu notices your distress and decides to ask about your condition. You were too busy trying to come up with a way to tell him that you missed his question, which only raises his concern for you. You don't need to help me, you know. He stopped. It took you a second to notice, finally turning your head to face him. He sighs. It seems you're already busy with personal matters. You quickly shook your head. It's not like that, I swear. I was just, thinking of. Your eyes start scanning the area in an attempt to think of a response fast. I think I know where he is. Shinsu's eyebrow raises. I'm positive he's by my street. Before he could ask you how you were so sure, you had taken a step closer to him and cut him off. There's no time for useless conversations. We have to go now, or else we might miss your cat. You grabbed his wrist without a single thought and proceeded to drag him behind you. The male was taken aback for a moment, but he was too busy wondering why you were rushing so abruptly to ask why you had the need to drag him. After a few blocks, you eventually let go of him. A few cats like to hang around here. You pointed at an alleyway where dumpsters were. Shinsu wastes no time to check it out while you remain on your spot, your head turning in different directions in hopes you spot Kira. After several minutes of checking, he walks out of the alleyway with a defeated look in his eyes. There were a few cats, but none of them were Kira. He explained. You proceeded to think, trying to cross out possible hideout spots. Kira only hangs out in 3 areas, you recalled, so you decided to check those first. While you were pointing and explaining directions to Shinsu, he couldn't help but wonder why you were so determined to help him out. The male decides to keep his mouth shut for now. He was lucky enough to have someone helping him out with possible leads, at least. On your 3rd attempt and last possible location, sure enough, Shinsu's eyes widened as he saw a white tail enter deeper into the alleyway. Kira, he exclaimed, surprising you as you watched him pick up his pace. Quickly, you tried to call out for him, but it was too late. You groaned, cursing under your breath before you ran after him. It was too early in the morning to run, but luckily you were naturally fast on your feet due to the number of times you were nearly late for a shift and a few classes. Shinsu had finally stopped, losing track of the cat, and that's when you finally caught up to him. He clicked his tongue, brows knitted. He's clearly running away from me. You stood in silence, observing the area closely until you finally spoke. Believe it or not, but there's actually a way to catch up to him. Shinsu gives you a questioning look before you started leading the way again. Are you sure that was your cat? Maybe it was another white one. You asked. I'm sure it was. You nodded. Alrighty then. I'm more than positive that he jumped inside a garbage chute. More and more questions piled themselves inside Shinsu's head, wondering how you knew this much. He started considering that maybe it was due to the number of jobs you had that you had a lot of experience when it came to these things. There are a few tunnels cats take to avoid the public eye, so they could meet up with each other or look for food. And you know this because… You sighed, a bit ashamed to admit your reason. Luckily, you didn't have to, since the same cat from earlier had just walked out of a crack in a wall. Shinsu's eyes widened, recognizing the feline almost instantly. "Kira," he calls out to the cat, crouching down as he held out his arms. Blue Eyes looked at his owner with hesitation until finally, he starts running towards Shinsu. The male grins at his cat approaching him, excited to have him back in his arms until the animal walks completely past him. Kira jumps into your arms instead without warning, almost clawing at you as he nuzzles against your chest with closed eyes. Shinsu stays down, disbelief in his eyes, while you looked absolutely terrified for what was next to come. Laughing nervously, you attempted to push the cat away from you, but he refused to let go of your shirt. "Your cat's so friendly," you said with a forced smile, while Shinsu gets back on his feet. You swallowed, looking down at Kira with defeated eyes. "Guess my cover's blown thanks to you, huh?" You laughed while he tilts his head at you innocently. Shinsu's arms fold before him, his eyes traveling from you to his cat. Before he could utter a word, you decide to start since it felt the most appropriate. Gently, you started scratching Kira behind his ears. "Yes, I may have been the neighbor that's been feeding your cat, but I really did not mean to cause this much trouble for the owner. If it makes you feel better, I promise to stop giving any cats snacks when I walk past them." Shinsu only lifts a brow at you, causing you to gulp. "Oh, okay, maybe that's overstepping. Okay then," you cleared your throat. "I'll avoid giving Kira snacks from now on. There's still stray cats from time to time that look like they need feeding after all." You mumbled the last sentence to yourself, a bit ashamed. The silence was overbearing until he heaves a breath. "I'm not going to lie to you. I've just been waiting for you to admit it since earlier." You blinked owlishly at his remark as he takes his cat from you without you realizing it. He notices your expression, which causes him to sigh once again. "I'm not that dumb to not see the lines connecting, you know. You started getting all jittery the second I brought up Kira's name, and that's when I was sure something was up." Shinsu looks down at his cat with a light scowl until the feline lightly licks his owner's finger. His face softens. "But I guess I can't be entirely mad at you." Before you could smile in relief, he cuts you off. "That doesn't mean you get a free pass for spoiling my cat to the point he refuses to eat anything I give him that isn't junk, though." All right, I'll stop it, okay?" For a brief moment, you could have sworn Shinsu smiled. He hums and finally puts Kira back down on the ground. "I better take this one back home since he reeks of garbage." Kira hisses at his owner from below, making him roll his eyes. You were about to exchange goodbyes, thinking that was the last of your conversation that day. But to your surprise, it wasn't. "Since you helped me out, and I don't like owing people favors, do you have anything for me to do to pay you back?" he says, shoving his hands inside his pockets as a cold breeze passes you both. On a normal day, you would have turned down his offer since you don't really play the whole favor card much. But since you actually had something you needed help with, you decided to bite. "There is something, actually." Shinsu takes a cart with him while you held on to the list, eyes scanning through them in silence. He looks around the area, noticing that there were a good amount of people. "And we're grocery shopping this late because…" You heaved a breath, tired of repeating your explanation. Grocery stores tend to reduce the pricing of some of their products at certain times, usually an hour before the place closes. He nods slowly. "But why don't they sell them when there are more people in the daytime? Isn't that a more financially smart way to get rid of expiring products?" His lack of experience and knowledge causes you to shake your head in disappointment. "You innocent child," you called him jokingly, making him roll his eyes at you. "Whatever, not gonna lie. But I expected you to turn down my offer the second I brought up grocery shopping and 10 p.m. into the conversation. You told him. He hums. What made you think that? Tilting your head from left to right, you shrugged. I don't know. You just seem like the kind of person who doesn't like going out of your house in the middle of the night. I assume maybe spending it to study instead? Shinsu doesn't respond to your claim. It didn't feel like you offended him, so you decided to let him be and finish your task quickly. After all, it was a Sunday night, which meant school followed the next day. Looking at the time, you realize 10 p.m. was approaching slowly. Before the battle starts, you turn to Shinsu from behind. I'm going to lay down a few rules for you to follow, and I need you to listen carefully, understood? Your sudden change of demeanor catches the male off guard, but he nods anyway. Firstly, you know how we should always respect elders, right? His brows furrowed, wondering to himself if you were lecturing him about manners as if he was a child. Taking in a deep breath, you continued. I want you to throw all of that out of the window right now. Shinsu's eyes instantly widened. What? Listen to me, Shinsu. I'm not joking right now. If you think it's necessary to push someone just to get the last block of cheese, then I need you to do it without hesitation. He looks at you worriedly, wondering if you were mentally okay and that he heard you correctly. I didn't bring you here just to be my extra set of hands, but to also be my getaway driver. He nods slowly at your lecture, deciding to keep his mouth shut since he's never seen you this passionate about something. And it was about pushing senior citizens to the ground if the choice was given. Never in a million years did he ever think he'd have this conversation. 30 more seconds. Was Shinsu regretting his decision? Even he didn't know the answer to that question. Once 10 p.m. hit, employees from different directions started pushing carts filled with discounted goods, leaving them in their designated spots. Shinsu blinks, and that's when he witnessed everything go down. You had already disappeared from his sight, already arguing with one of the 10 other customers. He stood nearby as you threw products at him left and right. There were a lot more people than usual, and it seemed like your original plan wasn't going to end as successfully as you hoped. Shinsu, you called for him while struggling to take a bag of baby carrots from a middle-aged lady. He looks at you with raised brows. Frozen aisle. Here, take this. You crumbled the list into a ball and threw it directly at him. I already memorized that thing, and I'll be here for a while, so go. He hesitates for a moment until you yell at him again. It's been a while, hasn't it? The lady you've been fighting with since earlier grins at you. You chuckled, watching her struggle to take the bag from you. Been busy with school. How are the grandkids? She scoffs. Probably being a lot more productive than you are right now. Your eyebrows rose at her claim, your smile growing into a grin. That makes the two of us then. While your battle in the produce section continued, Shinsu made his way towards the deli section. Luckily, he'd been at this grocery store before, so he knows the general direction of where things are. Once he made it there, it was already swarmed by dozens of people. To make matters worse, they all seemed to be in their senior years. Great, he told himself. Shinsu approaches the crowd slowly, watching as every product with a discounted tag was getting swooped away the second his eyes landed them. Although he wanted to help you out since you did help him find his cat, he didn't have enough strength in him to fight someone, especially someone older than him, for a slice of meat. It seemed immature and almost unnecessary. Without realizing it, he starts zoning out. Why were you so desperately trying to get everything on that list? He asked himself. Then piece by piece, he's reminded of the many jobs you have. It didn't feel right thinking about someone else's financial situation, so he shook those thoughts away before they could get any more personal. Before heading here, you had actually told him the reason, partially. These groceries weren't for you, but for your neighbor. He only assumed you were close to whoever they were since you also brought their clothes to the laundromat when you two bumped into each other earlier that day. Not only that, but it didn't seem like you were forced to do any of the tasks either. You're overanalyzing again, Hitoshi. He shook his head with a defeated sigh. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 snapped out of his thoughts when he saw a lady struggling to reach something on the top shelf. He turned back to the discounted area and noticed that there had been nothing left for him to take. So much for helping you out. Pushing his cart in a different direction, he approaches the lady and gives her a helping hand. She bows, smiling at him kindly. The two started conversing, but it was the usual conversation starters that sometimes led to something awkward. Did you come here alone? How old are you? Are you working? What school do you attend? Are you in a relationship? All of those. Their small talk came to an end as you called 𝗧𝗵𝗲 from behind. You smiled brightly at him, showing him all of the stuff you got on your own. Before you could put them in the cart, you noticed he was talking to a lady. Oh, you paused, looking at them from side to side. Was I interrupting something? The woman shook her head at you with a smile. Don't worry about it. I was just leaving. The two of you said your goodbyes, bowing to her as she made her way to the self-checkout. Once you were alone with 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and had time to look down at the cart, you realized he didn't get the things on the list. Shock took over your features. What happened? Were you too late? Don't tell me that lady took stuff from our cart and… No, she didn't. Sorry, but I didn't have it in me to push people around. His tone sounded sour, but you don't bother to snap at him. Your social battery has run out from arguing with old faces all night. Slowly, you approached the deli section and eyed the packed goods in silence. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 followed you shortly after, wondering what was on your mind. After a while, you finally picked something up. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looks at you from the side. But that's not disco. You nodded before he could finish. I know, but… You put the product inside the cart. I'll just get the stuff we missed and pay for them myself. You resumed your last task for the night while 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looks down at the cart. Wait here, and don't move. I'll be back in a few. He suddenly says and leaves you by yourself without any further explanation. You looked at his back with a brow raised, wondering what he was planning on doing. Despite your curiosity, you followed his orders and stayed put. While waiting for 𝗧𝗵𝗲, you took out your phone and decided to check if you had missed any texts from work or school. You felt somewhat sad seeing that you received no emails or messages. In your peripheral vision, you noticed a hand sneak itself inside your cart and snatch a product. Your eyes widened instantly, putting your phone away to see who the culprit was. Hey, you, without a word, the woman walks away as if she hadn't heard you. Quickly looking around, you noticed that 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was nowhere to be seen and doubt that he'll show up in time before the woman checks out with one of your items. You went behind the cart and ran after her. Noticing her by her clothes, you tapped her lightly on the shoulder. Excuse me, miss, but I'm gonna have to politely ask you to. She shrugged your finger off of her, giving you a cold glare as if you were nothing but dust. Is that how you treat your elders now? Biting your inner cheek, you took in a deep breath, remembering that people can see you. Not only that, but you were exhausted after today. You ran around the neighborhood looking and chasing after 𝗧𝗵𝗲's cat, had a 5-hour shift at the cafe on a Sunday because someone got sick, and then this. Before you could reply to her, she starts raising her voice at you. You're young. Look at yourself while I'm much older and clearly need this more than you do. Looking around, you realized she was attracting attention from cashiers and civilians waiting in line. Miss, these aren't for me. Therefore, making excuses again. People your age are so selfish. Always thinking about yourself and only yourself. You would have dropped the subject and moved on. But since these were for 𝗧𝗵𝗲, that was a different story. Swallowing, you continued. I'm not making excuses, miss. These are for my neighbor who couldn't come here herself because her granddaughter, who she hasn't seen in years, will be visiting and… You make the stupidest excuse. She raised her hand towards you, causing you to shut your eyes and brace for impact. To your surprise, you didn't feel anything. Opening your eyes slowly, you noticed that a hand had stopped her. Looking up, you realized it was 𝗧𝗵𝗲. What the… She turns her head and glares at him. Shinsu doesn't let her go, noticing that he had only provoked her more. I appreciate your concern, ma'am, but He pauses to look at you for a brief moment. These groceries are for her neighbor, believe it or not. He glances over you and tilts his head towards her basket of goods. You got his message and took the item she stole from you. She looks at him with gritted teeth. You. Before she could continue, security approached her along with the store's manager. A middle-aged man bows at you both. I deeply apologize for that, he says. You quickly shook your head. It's all good, you don't need to apologize. You smiled lightly at him. Workers don't have control over their customers. He lets out a relieved breath, nodding. We'll have to take her to the back and ask for her personal details to avoid anything like this happening again in the future. As an apology, why don't you take the things in her basket? You lean towards Shinsu. Do you think it'll be for free? You whispered. He looked back at you and shrugged. Once they successfully escorted her away from you both, you and Shinsu approached her now abandoned basket. Both of your eyes widened when you realized she had the things you both missed on the list. Is this? You looked up at Shinsu. You're like a magic charm or something. He sighs at your words. You could have gotten hit by someone if it weren't for me arriving on time. He transfers the items into your cart. You smiled at him. Yeah, like a good luck charm. You looked at him with hopeful eyes. Shinsu looks back at you tiredly. Don't forget that this is a one-time thing. I only did it because I owed you one. Don't look at like as if this won't be the last. Laughing at his bitter comment, you heaved a breath afterward. Well, of course. I knew that since the beginning. Once one of the cashiers finished scanning all of your items, and you paid using the money 𝗧𝗵𝗲 lent you, the two of you walked out of the store with hands full of bags. The walk back to your neighborhood was surprisingly noisy. Shinsu was giving you longer responses, and was even asking you questions himself. About this neighbor of yours. Before I interrupted the lady, I might have heard your explanation, he says. You nodded. Oh, right. Well, it's not really that personal, so I don't mind sharing. Looking up at the night sky, you admired the stars that decorated it beautifully. My neighbor, 𝗧𝗵𝗲, hasn't seen her granddaughter since she was in middle school. She's mentioned in the past that she went to a different city for high school, but I'm pretty sure she's back here for college. Shinsu listens to your story closely as you spoke. You sighed, now looking down to the ground. Despite her being back, she's been really busy, which is why she hasn't visited her at all since her arrival. I'm guessing they're close. You nodded with a smile. They still send each other messages, never call. Oh. You also seem close with this neighbor of yours. His words caught you off guard, looking at him with shocked eyes. Your smile fades a bit, but it's still there. I guess you can say that. 𝗧𝗵𝗲's kind of like my second mother. His purple brow raises in surprise. My parents separated when I was pretty young, and although I stayed with my mother first, she unfortunately passed, and so I had to stay with my father instead. Shinsu now regrets asking. Maybe he should have kept his mouth shut, he thought. You noticed his change of expression and laughed. I don't mind sharing, so don't take it too seriously. I've moved past that, believe me. If I wasn't comfortable with sharing, I wouldn't have spoken about it. Then again, divorce can be a sensitive topic to a few people, so if no, you're good. The walk back continued until you had finally reached a certain point. I'll have it handled, by the way. You don't need to walk me all the way home. You brought up, gesturing towards the 4 bags. Shinsu hums, looking at you. Are you sure? You scoffed at him. Please, this isn't the first time I went grocery shopping. He hesitates again. You didn't realize he would be that bothered about you carrying everything on your own. It was unexpected and almost sweet, you thought. You know, you giving me that look tells me that you don't think I have enough strength in me. Shinsu chuckles in amusement. Not what I was thinking, but since you brought that up. Asshole, you called him. earning another lazy smile from 𝗀𝐻. Not that you didn't mind the help. It just felt like you were overstepping 𝗀𝐻's favor when all you did was help him look for his cat. His cat that you ended up overfeeding and spoiling too much. Maybe you should offer him something as a thank you gift. You stopped and turned to look at him. I can take it from here. My house is straight ahead. 𝗀𝐻 nods and hands you the bags he was holding. Oh, and before I forget. You looked around, trying to see if you could put the bags somewhere safe for a moment before deciding the ground was the best option. 𝗀𝐻 cocks a brow as he watched you fish something outside of your bag. His eyes widened when he realized you were handing him a ticket of some sort. One of my co-workers handed me this. I'm not forcing you to come with me since it'll be tomorrow night, and it's a Monday. But you know, it wouldn't hurt. He takes it from you slowly with narrowed eyes. And you're giving it to me because... You sighed. Because you did a lot for me today. And it only seems fair. He nods slowly, you know. I would have expected you to owe me another one. But a ticket to some. He pulls the ticket closer to his face. Concert. You answered. Yeah, that. Inviting me to a concert never crossed my mind, especially when midterms are approaching. Fair point. But I just wanted to give it to you. That's all. They said I could bring a +1. But I don't really. You stopped slowly, carrying the bags again once you had given 𝗀𝐻 the ticket. He's silent, putting it inside his pocket. I'll take note of that, but it's not likely to happen. You groaned. Yeah, don't get your head stuck up your ass just 'cause I invited you now. He laughs, making you feel satisfied as you both exchanged your final goodbyes for the day before walking your separate ways. Shit, you swore to yourself as you looked up at the pouring sky. Just your luck, it started to rain the second you walked into a convenience store to buy yourself some breakfast. Holding your hand out, you allowed droplets of rain to fall into your palm. With a sigh and a prayer, you took out your phone from your pocket and checked the weather forecast. As your eyes scanned through the report, they narrowed as you continued to read, seeing that there was no hope for the rain to stop, for it was going to be a rainy morning. Since you already had your quick breakfast, your first plan of action was to check out the nearest vending machine that had an umbrella attachment next to it for people to rent if they had forgotten to bring one of their own. Quickly, you used your backpack as a temporary umbrella, booking it under the rain while also trying to be careful on your feet to avoid slipping. It didn't take long for your efforts to go to waste. Upon your arrival, a person had already taken the last umbrella before you could. As you were about to let out another curse, the rain had gotten stronger before any word could slip from your lips. The train station was still 2 blocks away. Were you desperate to catch the next train? Indeed you were. Not wasting another second, you shift directions and took the quickest route to the train station, forcing your way through a few civilians while muttering silent apologies to them. While running, you felt your phone vibrate inside your pocket, but you paid no mind as you wanted to finish your first mission before anything else. You knew you were going to receive concerning stares from students and teachers. But that didn't sound as bad as you coming in late soaking wet in the middle of a lecture. Although classes didn't start for another hour, there was a good chance you'd be late due to the torrential rain. Not wanting that to happen, despite your professor being Aizawa, who tends to be laid back compared to your other teachers, you didn't want to read the file he would send later that day confused. Swiping your card on the machine, you walked past it without a problem and made your way down, nearly slipping. As if time slowed down, you watched the doors of the train start to close before your eyes. 𝗀𝐻 casually looks at the time, waiting outside of a classroom as they had their lecture. His eyes avert their attention towards the window, observing the rain. He took this chance to take in the silence. Unfortunately, that didn't last very long. The male hears squelching noises coming from the other end of the hallway, his lax features quickly transitioning to a disturbed and concerned one. Your entire body was soaking wet, especially your legs from all the running you did. As you breathed heavily and made your way to your first class, You didn't even notice Shinsu's presence until he calls out your name. At the sound of his voice, your body froze before you turned to face him with raised brows. Despite your gaze, Shinsu doesn't say a word, as if he was waiting for you to explain your situation first. I can't talk right now. I'm about to. Before you could finish, the doors you were ready to enter opened without warning, a crowd of students making their exit as they walked past you. Shinsu moves aside to give them space, now standing beside you. Yeah, you kinda missed it, he says. You were too tired to fire something back at him, only letting out a breath in defeat. God, I just want to lie down somewhere until the rain settles. Did your neighbor forget to tell you it would be raining? Not knowing if he was joking or not, you sent him a death glare anyway. You're pushing it, Shinsu Hitoshi, you warned. As you waited for most of the students to leave, you turned to face the male. What are you doing here anyway? Don't tell me we go to another class together. He hummed, shaking his head. It's my free period right now. I came here to pass something to Aizawa-sensei, he explained. You raised your eyebrows at him. Aizawa-sensei, Shinsu nods before finally entering, taking something out of his bag as he approached Aizawa, who was still conversing with a few of his students. Hesitantly, you walked in with your head down, hoping that no one notices your current state. Once you've made it to Aizawa's desk, he looks at you with wide eyes. He says your name nervously, which makes you feel even more embarrassed. You flash him an apologetic smile. Good morning, sensei. Aizawa's brows were furrowed in worry. What happened? He asked, Shinsu waiting for him from behind, while also listening in on your conversation. The students he was talking with previously saw this as a cue to leave. I didn't know it would be raining, and they ran out of umbrellas before I could rent any near the convenience store. You explain fast, not wanting to repeat yourself. He nods. Well, you better get changed, or else you'll catch a cold. He turns to Shinsu and gathers the papers in his hand. You don't pay mind to his words, tossing it aside. But sensei, is there, any way I could? You hesitate, biting your inner cheek as you fought your face from warming. Aizawa seems to understand your question, answering before you could finish. As always, I'll have a file sent through email. Don't worry too much. The lesson I discussed is just a repeat of last year. I'm sure you can manage. Despite his reassuring words, you couldn't quite stand still. He notices your expression, prompting him to add. I won't be making a quiz out of today's lecture since, again, it has already been discussed the previous year, and also because not many people came to my class today. I'm sure it's the same reason as yours. And with that, he turns to Shinsu, putting an end to your conversation. Taking in a deep breath, you turned on your heel and headed for the exit. Once you were back in the hallway, you finally took your phone out to check what the message you missed was. Seeing the name broke you away from your thoughts. Takami Keigo, good morning. You stared at his message in silence. It wasn't the first time he sent you a morning text, but your past morning messages from him always ended with bad news. Is this urgent? What do you want? As expected, he didn't read your message instantly. Just as you were about to put your phone away, you locked eyes with Shinsu, who had just walked out of the classroom. He sends you a small wave before shoving his hand inside a pocket. Are you heading back home to change? He asks. You scoffed at him, making him raise his brows. It already took me an hour to get here. What makes you think I'm going back? Shinsu merely shrugs. Just as Aizawa-sensei said, you'd get sick. I'm stronger than you think. Anyways, what's your next class? You quickly shift the subject, wanting to move on. Shinsu seems to be a bit surprised at your question, but answers. Your lips part. That's across campus. You should probably get going now. You suggested while checking the time on the wall. He nods. Yeah, I should. As he was about to take a step, he turned to look at you once more. You looked back at him with raised eyebrows. I almost forgot about the project. When's your free period today? It takes you a moment to reply. trying to remember your Monday schedule. At around 2 p.m., I believe. Yours? I have to meet another group of people at 2 p.m. You looked at him in surprise, laughing a bit. Another group project? He rolls his eyes at you. Makes me the luckiest man alive, doesn't it? You laughed again, a more genuine one this time. Well, what about after school? Maybe after one of your shifts, you hummed. I've got a shift in the cafe today. Since it's a weekday, we're closing at around 9 p.m. Are you willing to wait that long? Shinsu's eyes narrowed as he tries to think of an answer. It didn't take long until he nods. What about I meet you there an hour before it closes? Would your manager be bothered if you were doing schoolwork during your shift? You shook your head. I'm going to be honest with you. There's barely any students on a Monday night. So I'm sure it wouldn't be a problem as long as I'm not slacking off. All right, then that settles it. Once you've exchanged goodbyes with each other, you walk in the opposite direction as him. As you headed to your next class, your phone starts vibrating again. Unlike earlier, this time, it was a call. Fishing it out of your pocket and checking the caller ID, you answered it after a few more rings. What? You let out, detached. The voice from the other line coughs before calling your name out in a weak tone. I know you must be busy right now, but… You already knew what the following few words were going to be before he finished. With an agitated sigh, you finally speak. How much do you need this time? Around, you know what, just take what you need. I can't talk right now. I have classes to attend, and I was already late to my first one. Before he could respond to your last sentence, you end the call and heave out another breath. You just prayed to yourself that whatever amount he was claiming wouldn't interfere with the utility bills. Such an embarrassing father to have. How could he continue living with himself? You thought. Enjoy, and please come again. You bowed to the customer as you handed them their drink. Once they've left, 𝐈𝐺𝐸 leans back with a deep breath. Can closing come any slower? She whines as you silently agree with her. Monday shifts were certainly the worst only because you had nothing to do in them. They were boring, but you've learned to appreciate them a bit. It was better than dealing with a nagging customer that wouldn't take your words into consideration. Your eyes peeled themselves away from the floor and observed 𝐈𝐺𝐸 instead. You were surprised to see her come to work. You don't have the right to think this, but you've always wondered why she was working if she misses 80% of her shifts. 𝐈𝐺𝐸 didn't seem to be struggling financially either. Then again, why would that matter to you? Everyone has a reason to get a part-time job. There are students who need to make a living for themselves, whether with or without parental assistance, such as yourself, and those who merely desire work experience. Perhaps 𝐈𝐺𝐸 was the latter, despite her skipping out on most of her shifts, you noted. Your train of thought was quickly interrupted by the sound of the bell from the entrance. Good evening, you and 𝐈𝐺𝐸 say in unison, bowing to the approaching customer. 𝐈𝐺𝐸, the voice says. She looks at him with slightly widened eyes. Shinsu? Her surprised expression shifts into a warm one. What brings you here this late? He merely shrugs. Came here to meet with someone for a project. Shinsu's eyes then move to meet yours. 𝐈𝐺𝐸 turns her attention to the two of you before her lips part, nodding. Shinsu orders a drink, taking out cash and handing it to 𝐈𝐺𝐸 before making his way towards an empty seat, not too far from the counter. As you made his drink, 𝐈𝐺𝐸 invades your personal space, leaning close to your ear. Don't worry. I'll cover for you. You turn to look at her with a raised brow. She sighs at your cluelessness. I'll take over while you talk to Shinsu regarding your project. So don't worry about slacking off, 'cause I got it covered. Blinking owlishly, you don't know what to say. Thanks, you let out, and she beams. You weren't worried about that, actually. You never plan on telling 𝐈𝐺𝐸 this out loud, but you were more anxious about her being left behind the counter by herself. Since it was a Monday and the place was practically empty, excluding 4 customers, 2 of them being Shinsu and Deku, you decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Once you finished making Shinsu's drink, you decided to hand it to him yourself. Order 832, you say as you set it down at a safe distance away from his laptop. He looks up at you. Thanks. Shinsu takes a sip from it before speaking. I have a question. Do the order numbers mean anything? Or are they generated randomly? He swirls his drink around with his straw. It's generated randomly. At least, I hope it is. He hums, observing the beverage in his hand. Interesting. Finally, he puts it down and faces you. Anyways, would you like to take a seat? He gestures to the available seat beside him. You nodded, taking his offer. Shinsu opens a file and moves his laptop a bit so you could see. I've already combined ours, by the way. You nodded as your eyes read through everything. All that's left is for our formatting, presentation, the stats part, and depending on us, maybe even an interview. You looked at him with hopeful eyes, but he quickly dismisses your hope. People from the company. He elaborates. There's no way in hell we're going to Shimoda. Frowning, you leaned back. Okay, but what if only one of us? Shinsu sighs at your stubbornness. I'm already telling you that we don't have time. Especially you. He crosses his arms on his chest. Unless you plan on skipping work. You stay silent at his challenge, earning a chuckle from the male. Deciding it was best, you and Shinsu decided to split tasks while occasionally checking on the other's work from time to time. You were assigned to arrange the format while Shinsu designed the slides. To your surprise, Shinsu was exceptional at art. You've learned and noticed a lot of remarkable things about him ever since your first meeting, and this was the most shocking one thus far. Although this was your first time seeing him do anything art-related, it was still impressive. How can a person be so good at many things? Random question. But did you ever consider taking up art? Your question causes Shinsu's focus to break, his eyes peeling away from his screen to look at you. What? You repeat your question, but this time slower. Why are you suddenly asking? He dodges your question again. No reason. You seem like you'd be good at it, that's all. You say, turning away from his screen to look at your own. Shinsu's silent, not sure what to say. He rests his jaw above his knuckles, eyeing you closely. Did you ask that just because I'm making our slides? You now feel embarrassed hearing him say it out loud. Before you could retort, he cuts you off with a sigh and finally answers in a low voice. That was the initial plan, actually. Your face flushes with interest, forcing you to fix your gaze on him as he returns his gaze to his laptop. Shinsu then stops talking, not adding anything to his cryptic response. Regret slowly fills you, making you worry if you went too far and brought up a delicate subject. Out of nowhere, Ashido lands a slap on your back, causing you to jolt forward. 10 minutes until closing time. You two better start packing up. She announces with an excited smile. Shinsu nods while you rub the part she hit. Ashido finally leaves you two alone, skipping to the locker room. Luckily, she had cleaned pretty much everything and had all of the chairs stacked up on their respective tables. You can go ahead now. I still need to get changed. You told him, pointing at the door behind the counter. He looks at you with a straight face before speaking. We live on the same street, so I'll just wait for you, he says, to your surprise. Nodding, you rushed to the back and quickly changed while Mina was practically throwing all of her belongings inside her locker harshly. She finally closes it, turning to look at you. Say, I'll be seeing you tonight, right? You froze mid-unbuttoning, looking at her with wide eyes. Tonight? Ashido blinks at you before responding. The gig. Just like that. You remembered your previous meeting with her last Saturday, how she gifted you 2 tickets to a gig that she manages. She frowns at you. Did you forget? You don't remember promising her that you'll be there? But just in case, you played it off cool. Of course not. Why would I? Her features remained still, not impressed. Taking in a deep breath, you braced yourself for the next event to happen. I'll be there, you say with a weak smile. Before you could blink, 𝐎𝐻𝐸𝐵 pulls you into a tight hug and lifts you off from the ground that your eyes almost popped out of your sockets. "You're really the best," she giggles loudly. "Now that I know you're coming, I better hurry up and get going to check up on them and the conditions of each member. It starts at 10 p.m., okay? I'll see you there." She was gone from your sight in an instant, and she'd most certainly departed the cafe as well. Doing one last checkup to see if you've missed anything, you and Shinsu finally left. Since your return from the break room, he noticed a change in your attitude. His suspicions only added up when you failed to listen and answer a few of his questions. "Did something happen?" he finally asks. You were unsure of your closeness with Shinsu, so you hesitate to respond. Your conversations haven't completely branched out of school yet, so could you really consider him a friend yet? "It wouldn't hurt to tell," you shrugged. "I'm kind of in a bit of a pickle." And just like that, you told Shinsu about your conversation with 𝗧𝗓𝗧. He nods in silence, not uttering a word until you let out a groan. "Dumbass, you should have just said no. Listen, if it were that easy, I would have done so." You cut him off, yelling. Shinsu lets out a defeated sigh, crossing his arms on his chest. "I didn't think you'd be those kinds of people, but I guess it's somewhat refreshing to know that." You looked at him with furrowed brows. "Are you calling my misfortune refreshing?" He couldn't help but chuckle, shaking his head. "It's nothing, don't worry about it. Anyways, what do you plan on doing now?" Shinsu returns to the main topic. You blew raspberries to think. "Well, my only choice is to go, right?" He shrugs again. "You could ditch it, you're heartless." You cut him off before sighing. After a long minute of silent thinking, your eyes light up with an idea, turning to face the male who stares back at you, perplexed. "What about you come with me?" Shinsu doesn't waste a second to answer. "Absolutely not. I gave you a ticket," you retort. But he wasn't having any of it. "Yes, but I never promised you that I would go." He lifts a finger at you. "It was an invitation, not an order," he remarked, emphasizing each syllable. You frown. "Pretty please?" Shinsu had no idea as to why you were so insistent with him joining you. But he found your begging quite amusing, so he wasn't too bothered. "What can I benefit from attending a gig at 10 p.m. on a Monday night?" You shrugged. "A good time? An escape from schoolwork?" You responded with a forced grin. Shinsu looks at you tiredly. "You really do lack a sense of responsibility, huh?" You took in a deep breath before exhaling, trying to keep your nerves in check in case you snap at him. Watching you try to calm yourself down, Shinsu finally decides to ask, "Are you really that desperate to not go alone?" "Kinda. I mean, you seem much closer to 𝗧𝗓𝗧 than I am." You answered in a genuine tone that Shinsu could not deny. "There's a reason behind that, and I'd prefer not to say." You heaved a breath. "I'm going to look so out of place in there." He cocks a brow at you. "And what makes you think I can help?" Laughing nervously, you rub the back of your head. "We can stand out together," you say in an unsure tone, earning a sigh from the male. You truly are hopeless. You entered the dark venue with parted lips, admiring all of the flashing lights from above as they danced along the walls and floors. "This place is smaller than I thought," you said, turning to look at Shinsu. "What did you expect from a gig?" You shrugged. "I've never been into one. Plus, they look bigger in movies." To your surprise, there were quite a lot of people. It wasn't to the point of it being cramped, but it felt just right. There were a few familiar faces, and they were people from 𝗧𝗓𝗧's group of friends. As you observed your surroundings in awe, Shinsu stayed behind you in silence. "Don't worry, by the way. As we agreed, we'll only stay for 3 songs. You remind him, and the male only hums. Feeling guilty for forcing him to accompany you, you turn to apologize. "Thank you." Again. You dipped your head, but he only raises a hand. "It's all good. Are you sure? I can't help but think that you're uncomfo. Shinsu?" A voice from the side calls for him, and you recognize the owner. You shift your focus to the female. who was staring at him with wide eyes. You were perplexed as to why Ishido was looking at Shinsu with a hint of panic in her eyes, given their previous exchange had been considerably more friendly. It seemed Shinsu had noticed as well, but chose not to say. Before he could return a reply, the lights dim, and the machinery below starts to emit white puffs of smoke as the stage's curtains begin to separate from one another, revealing 5 silhouettes standing behind them. Then, 5 different spotlights shine from above, each of the members having one of their own. Is everyone ready? A girl with short and purple hair asks through the mic, while the rest of her bandmates start playing their first song of the night. The crowd cheers back with their hands raised above their head. Your vision finally settles, and you recognize the lead singer, 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐵, a person from Ishido's friend group. You've heard from Ishido during one of your shifts that a friend of hers was musically talented. Your focus was fixed on her until a blonde takes over the song, the two sharing a mic while they both played their electric guitars. Looking at them in awe, you already knew the two had great chemistry just by watching them perform together. It almost seemed perfect, you thought. The crowd was going wild, chanting out all of their names. It didn't take long for you to recognize another face on the stage. This time, it was someone you were much closer with, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. Holy! You mumbled to yourself, completely taken aback at the fact that it really was him. He's always offered you free tickets to one of their gigs, but you turn them all down for good reasons. The first song eventually ends with a drum solo by another blonde. The audience gives them a round of applause, some even whistling. You turn to Shinsu with a smile, but it quickly fades when you realized he had been on his phone. You knew that he only came due to your pleas, but you would have appreciated it a bit more if he paid a bit more attention. Were you expecting too much from him? He notices your stare and looks up at you with a brow raised. What? You blinked at him, swallowing as you tried to think of something to say. It felt off asking someone to pay attention to an event you forced them to attend with you. Was there even an appropriate way to ask without sounding pushy and selfish? Before you could muster a reply, instruments begin playing once again. This time, unlike the first performance, the blonde with a black lightning-shaped streak on the left side of his fringe starts the song. He takes the mic from its stand and runs to the edge of the stage, yelling out the lyrics while bopping his head as the crowd did the same. If only you knew his name, 𝗓𝗓𝗡, 𝗓𝗓𝗡, 𝗓𝗓𝗡. The cheers get increasingly louder, while the rest of his crew back his vocals up with their instruments. You turn to Shinsu slowly, noticing that he was still using his phone. Leaning close towards the male, "What are you doing right now?" you asked him, yelling as it was almost impossible to hear yourself. He stares at you. "Stuff," he replies. There was an obvious change in his behavior compared to earlier. You start wondering if he had received bad news through a text. Instead of paying attention to the stage, you observed Shinsu a little longer, trying to decide if you should push the topic or let him sort his stuff out himself. Maybe guilting him into going was a terrible idea after all. Then, slowly, your eyes travel back to the same blonde from earlier. You felt like you've seen him before, but you weren't too sure. Perhaps he was a person you've served in one of your many shifts. The convenience store, the cafe, maybe? You go through your list in silence, but it didn't feel right. Nothing seemed to fit. It was normal not to remember a person you've only served once, twice, or even 5 times. You've faced many customers. There was no way you had the energy to remember them all. 𝗓𝗓𝗡, huh? You mumbled to yourself, recalling the name the crowd was chanting moments ago. An idea comes across your mind, prompting you to take your phone out and do a bit of research on the band mid-performance. You found their social media page, checking on the list of accounts they were following, and eventually found the male. Kaminari Denki, his display name says. Without realizing it, you accidentally ended up stalking his account. Unlike the most recent photos, which were professionally taken and used to promote their band, the ones towards the bottom were considerably more personal. Nothing was out of the ordinary. Kaminari had selfies, photos with friends, sceneries, and many more. You would have stopped and returned to the show if it weren't for a certain image that caught your attention. 3 years ago, the date states below the caption. It felt like you were almost dreaming. Blinking with force, you tried to process what was before you in disbelief. Hesitantly, you gulped, your pointer finger slowly reaching to poke Shinsu's shoulder, until a loud crash came from in front. The audience gasps in panic, while the remaining members on the stage rushed down. What happened? You looked around quickly, trying to get as much information with everyone looking pale. Shinsu doesn't speak up at first, but eventually does when the lights turn back on. Kaminari fell off the stage when he was singing. Your eyes widened in horror. Is he okay? You shift your attention to the swarm of people in an area, assuming that they were surrounding Kaminari. He merely shrugs. No idea. After a minute of silent worrying, you finally see the sea of people make way for 2 figures. Dude, relax, Kaminari says to his friend with his arm wrapped around their shoulder. The redhead stares at him in horror. You felt pretty bad, so how can I relax? Eventually, they were heading to where you and Shinsu stood, right beside the entrance. Golden eyes widen at the sight of purples. Hitoshi, he calls with his brows raised. Denki, he replies calmly. First name basis. The blonde lets out a laugh. I didn't expect to see you here of all places. Shinsu hums. That is true, before their surprise reunion can continue. The redhead cuts them off. Sorry to interrupt, but we kind of need to get Denki's ankle checked, he says in a worried and apologetic tone. No worries, please. Shinsu takes a step away from the entrance, granting them more space as they walked past you both. Hitoshi, the blonde calls. He turns to look at him with raised brows. Kaminari smiles. I'll run back here once it's clear so we can catch up. All right. Before Shinsu could reply with an answer, he was already out of his sight. Well, this is a surprise, a voice says in front of you, making you draw your attention to the male. You flashed him a warm smile. It really is, huh? Someone suddenly grabs hold of the mic, tapping it before finally speaking. We would like to call everyone's attention that we'll be taking a 10-minute break, Ashido announces. Zero looks at you from head to toe. Not the outfit I would expect to see someone wear to an event like this, but you look amazing like always, he says with a grin. You playfully rolled your eyes at him. Ashido gave me tickets a few days ago, and I just had free time. You lied, hoping Shinsu wouldn't snitch on you. He couldn't help but laugh. I can't believe she invites you once, and you said yes right away. You sighed. How many times do I have to tell you that I'm always busy? The male waves a hand around. Right, my bad. It didn't take long until Ashido starts calling for the band's attention. Most likely an emergency meeting, you thought. Zero cuts your conversation short, waving you goodbye as he walks away. Once everyone was at a faraway distance from you and Shinsu, you turned and finally asked. Okay, what was that? You wasted no time. He looks at you. What are you rambling about? You, of course. Come on. Something was clearly up between you and Kaminari. Even I feel like Ashido's reaction from earlier was hinting something. He doesn't respond immediately, but he averts his eyes away from yours. Slowly, Shinsu shoved his hands inside his pockets, putting his phone away finally. He takes in a deep breath before exhaling. All right, fine. You mentally prepare yourself for his answer. Denki and I used to date. He's my ex, he elaborates with a shrug. You look at him with wide eyes, now realizing the problem you have created. Of all things you could have possibly done, it had to be dragging Shinsu to his ex's gig. We ended on good terms, so don't overthink it, he says, noticing your displeasure. You shook your head nonetheless. Poor Kaminari. Shinsu hears your mumbling, looking at you with a scowl as you straighten. Sorry. Do you really think I was the problem in the relationship? He asks in an offended tone. Swallowing, you realized you were digging your own grave. You pondered in silence, gradually concluding that perhaps that was just Shinsu's personality. Feeling horrible, you apologize again, explaining to the male that you shouldn't have assumed. He only nods. It's all good. Since I answered your question. His eyes moved towards 𝗧𝗪, who was still in a meeting with the crew. Didn't think you would know anyone here. What's your relationship? You follow his eyes. Oh, right. Before you could answer, you remembered an event that occurred previously. Actually, you've met 𝗧𝗪 before. He looks at you, confused. The first time we met, the convenience store. Shinsu's vision moves up to the ceiling to think. Right, I forgot about that. Your co-workers at that convenience store. You nodded at his question. Not long after, you decide to change the subject. So, should we head back now? Although our agreement was to stay for 3 songs, it seems like it'll take a while. He nods at your suggestion. Sure, that was only half of your reason. In reality, you were itching to ask Shinsu more questions and wished for some privacy and a more quiet environment where you wouldn't have to yell your lungs out to have a simple conversation. After exchanging goodbyes with Ashido and thanking her for the invite, you finally walked out of the venue with Shinsu. It was painfully silent between you both. Your initial plan was to ask him more about his relationship with Kaminari, but you couldn't find the right transition. Were you just going to throw everything at him immediately? You asked yourself. You look like your dog just died. He cuts your train of thought, making you look up from the ground to stare back at him in shock. Shinsu chuckles, shaking his head before admiring the night sky. Our relationship wasn't serious. Truth be told, it only lasted a couple of months before we concluded that we wanted different things. You don't respond, deciding to let him tell you everything without interruptions. At least that was the initial plan until Shinsu stayed silent. What do you mean by different things? He inhales, his lips forming a straight line. Well, before anything official, I had no desire to be in a relationship. You paid close attention to his expressions and noticed how the color of his eyes glowed brighter under the moonlight. And you can only guess what happened after that. Long story short, Denki wanted to take things to the next level, and I couldn't commit. You finished, making Shinsu turn to look at you. He nods slowly. Yeah, I couldn't. School's already such a workload, so there was no way it was ever going to happen. He faces front, stuffing his hands inside his pockets. There were no obvious hints of discomfort in his behavior, so you were somewhat relieved it didn't seem like you were forcing him to info dump. Well, what about you? You looked at him with wide eyes, pointing at yourself. Me? Shinsu nods. I've shared a bit too much about me today, so it's only fair you do the same. Your eyes squint in suspicion. So that was your true intention since the beginning. He merely shrugs. Not necessarily. I just thought about it a few seconds ago. I mean, you don't have to. Taking in a deep breath, you let it out. Geez, you're way too much. Fine then, what do you want to know? The corners of his lips twitch into an amused smile. I've been wanting to ask you about your relationship with that one cop. As if he did something to scare you. You looked at him in horror. Shinsu notices your discomfort, causing him to stop walking for a moment, his grin fading. What? You stumbled, feeling completely vulnerable. Panicking, Shinsu quickly explains the context. Saturday, a few hours after we bumped into each other at the library. He explained as you listened to every single syllable closely, as if your life depended on it. I was eating lunch with Aizawa-sensei, and I happened to spot you leaving the place. Shit you swallowed to try to get some moisture back into your drying mouth. How much did you see? You said under your breath, Shinsu almost not catching it. He has never seen someone look at him this way, so it was alarming. Most looks he's received are glares, but never fear. Looking down at your hand grip on the strap of your bag, he noticed it shaking a bit. Hey, he was interrupted by the sound of ringing that came from your pocket, causing your heart to nearly leap out of your chest. As you frantically fished it out, Your eyes widened even more as you read the caller ID. Swallowing, you looked up at 𝗀𝐶. He nods. Go ahead, he allows, turning his attention elsewhere to give you some privacy. You took a few steps away from 𝗀𝐶 before answering the call. What is it? I'm in the middle of something, you say, almost out of breath. Takami's pleasant grin fades when he notices the panic in your voice. Are you in danger? No, I'm not. I'm with someone right now. And you pulled the phone away from your ear to take a breather. Maybe it was a good thing he called, you thought. Finally drawing it back to your ear, you resumed as if nothing happened. You rarely call me. Did something urgent happen? Listen, kid, I'm not sure what's happening there, but are you really? Yes, I'm okay. Anyways, if you're calling, then it must mean it's an emergency. Not only that, but you also sent me a morning text without any further explanation. What gives? It takes him a moment to reply, eventually doing so. Sorry for not replying. I was sent to... He pauses. I've been busy and didn't have the time to check my phone. You nodded. So, what is it? You asked, not wanting to keep 𝗀𝐶 waiting since you were sure that he could almost hear your conversation despite the distance. I got a message from Kurogiri stating that he's heard one of his customers bring up your father's name. It turns silent on the other line, making you swallow. Perhaps your nerves were kicking in due to 𝗀𝐶's question, making you more emotional and vulnerable than usual. Takami takes in a deep breath. I know I like to poke fun out of you, but please take care of yourself. You don't know what suddenly got into him, but you chose not to ask. Were they loan sharks? He doesn't respond immediately. I'm not so sure yet, but I'll look into it tomorrow morning. I can assure you that. You nodded slowly. Thanks, Takami-san. He smiles a bit. No problem. The call eventually ends. Luckily, your conversation with Takami made you feel a bit lighter. Turning on your heels, you looked at 𝗀𝐶. Call's finished, you announced to get his attention. He starts approaching you, still wearing a worried look on his face. Sorry about that, you apologized with a faint smile. 𝗀𝐶 shook his head. It's all good, I don't mind. The two of you eventually resume walking back to the station, but now it was dead silent. You knew 𝗀𝐶 was startled by your reaction, so you couldn't blame him for wanting to be careful. You also didn't feel like lying to the male after he told you about his past relationship. What was the right approach in this? You don't have to give me an answer, he says. 𝗀𝐶 turns his head to look at you. I didn't mean to scare you, so let's just forget that ever happened. His tone was genuine, with no hint of malice. It wasn't because you couldn't trust 𝗀𝐶, but it wasn't like you completely trusted him either. You've always pushed people away and refused to open up when it came to your personal life. Who would want to listen to someone's distorted family history? During high school, the time you started working at multiple places to earn money, that's when students started spreading rumors about you. But you paid no mind, not giving them a time of your day, as you only wanted to keep living. Money is not something everyone can have. It doesn't grow on trees either. A part of you felt horrible for not feeling comfortable about opening up to 𝗀𝐶 after everything he's told you. The walk continued after that without you replying to him. Eventually, without you even realizing it, you both had already arrived at your neighborhood, only noticing when 𝗀𝐶 stopped his steps. I'll see you, he says with a hand waving at you. Your lips part, but no words leave them. You pathetically watched as 𝗀𝐶 starts heading in a different direction, your body refusing to move. Just as you thought you were finally becoming close with someone after years of spending most of your time alone, everything turned to flames before your eyes, and you had no idea how to fix it. Was this the end?